Of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations, pursuant to order of reference of Wednesday, September 23, 2020, the committee is meeting on its study of Canada-China relations. Il s'agit d'une réunion.
This is a hybrid meeting pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on January 25th, 2021.
Excuse me. Before turning to our witnesses, I'd like to ask if there are any objections to setting aside 10 minutes before the end of today's meeting or at the end of today's meeting, so with 10 minutes early, to quickly discuss a few items relating to committee business. Seeing none,
Mr. Chair, that wasn't on the notice, and we only have an hour with NSICOP, so I suggest we proceed with the agenda and, if necessary, extend for 10 minutes.
Well, we'll see if that's possible. I don't know. That would may be possible. We'll see. But first of all, we'll carry on for now. So I would first like to welcome our first witnesses for tonight. As an individual, we have, forgive me for the mispronunciations, Kemi Lamau, Community Health Lead. From the Uyghur Research Institute, we have Ruki Turdush, Research Director and Uyghur Rights Advocate. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We will start with the opening remarks from Ms. Lamau, followed by Mr. Turdush. Ms. Lamau, please proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Gisele, bonjour, hello. I'm Chimi Lamo, and before I begin, I want to acknowledge and express my gratitude to the original caretakers of this land and the elders of the past and present, and to any who should have been here or may be here physically, mentally, and spiritually. My immigrant parents came from the land of snow, Tibet, which according to Freedom House is the least free country alongside Syria. A recent Human Rights Watch report stated that children as young as 3 years old are being stripped away of their cultural identity, which to me is another repeat of the horrors of Canada and Australia's residential schools where Indigenous children were killed or forcibly assimilated into the settler society. Time and time again, we've seen the Chinese government silence voices of the Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolians, and it's no doubt that Chinese government's intimidation and geopolitical bullying through aggression and expansion across borders from the South China Sea to the Indo-Tibet border presents a clear threat to both regional and global security. However, today, let me share with you my experiences of the CCP attempting to silence and infringe upon my rights of freedom of speech, expression, even in an open and democratic society like Canada. In 2019, I became the target of the wrath most likely crafted by the Chinese Communist Party when I ran for student elections at the University of Toronto Scarborough. Before the elections had even began, or before the results had even come out, my phone had started going off with notifications, over 10,000 comments on my social media posts, and then an online petition against me for simply being a candidate because of my Tibetan identity, not because of my work or my capabilities. The comments were harsh. They included rape threats, death threats, targeting not just me, but my family. Comments like, the bullet that will go through you is made in China, or things like, if I see you, I'll punch you. And there was even one that I still recall to this day that said, your mom is dead. I kid you not. I recall having to call my mother to check in on her without frightening her. And throughout my presidential term, although things slowed down on social media because of the international support I received, I continued to receive occasional threats, dehumanizing and degrading comments till this day. Additionally, prior to COVID-19, students on my campus who threatened to kill and rape me freely roamed around my campus, pointed, stared, followed, took photos of people that I communicated with, resulting to actually friends escorting me to the washrooms. Community members of the Allied Nations who are subjected to CCP's colonial violence aren't alien to these tactics. We have witnessed China's interference and influences not just in the university campuses, but also in our communities. The long-arm tactics of the CCP is also affecting Chinese international students who are paying 4 to 5 times more for an education, but are having to become incognito spies for the embassy or get bullied to follow party lines and protests for initiatives that is so-called deemed threatening instead of focusing on their education. Anonymous Chinese students have actually written to their student union saying that they're terrified by the presence of organizations like Canadian CSSAs who are reporting campus activities to the Chinese government. We've seen this overt influence in our academic institutions, but the threat is widespread. The CCP propaganda is infiltrating our communities and insidiously placing itself in progressive spaces, conflating anti-CCP sentiments to be part of the rise of anti-Asian hatred. Till this day, my mother worries way more than required for my well-being because of these threats. No Canadian on Canadian soil who wishes to serve their community should have to check if they're being followed. No student leader should have to see active groups on their campus self-censoring themselves because of the fear of going through what I had to go through. No mother should have to worry about their child being punched, raped, or killed for standing up for something that they care about. Many Canadians, including my parents, were stateless refugees because of the illegal occupation of their countries and had to move several times to find a safe home for their kids. And eventually, after long years of having transnational families and being displaced, found a home in Canada only to be intimidated and be subjected to long-arm tactics of the CCP. Canada is meant to empower youth, not embolden and support through their silence the ones who kidnap and strip them away from their parents. And it's no doubt that the Chinese government ruthlessly tries to crush all dissent. I'd like to encourage honorable members here today and our government to please listen to your Canadians and follow up with concrete actions. And I can tell you more through a report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lamo. And now, Ms. Tardouche, please proceed. You have 5 minutes. Please unmute.
Good evening. Bonsoir. My name is Rukia Tardouche. I'm an ethnic Uyghur Canadian and Canadian citizen. I would like to testify today on my personal experience and my community's experience about China's threat in Canada. In February 11, 2019, I was invited by McMaster University Muslim Student Association to give speech about ongoing genocide in East Turkestan. During my speech, a few Chinese students tried to disturb me, and one of them filmed the whole presentation and actually verbally assaulted me with foul language. I received later from someone leaked screenshot evidence of those Chinese students' group conversation during my speech. They have discussed how to disturb me and send the recorded video to the group. And the guy who recorded me said, I have all the materials if anyone needed. This is clearly intelligence gathering. Another one said, how come lots of people in this event? We had been told by embassy to report this event to the Chinese Student Association and the school. That's mean Chinese embassy informed those Chinese students about the event in advance and instructed them what to do. He also said, find out who's her son, so they can look for my son, whatever purpose. I suspect this person could be Chinese diplomat or covert agent. The McMaster Chinese Student Association and academics published a joint statement on February 13. The language of the statement exactly echoes the language of the Chinese Communist Party's false propaganda line. The statement also mentioned that they have reported the incident to the Chinese embassy and sent compliant letter to the school administration. Later, the Embassy of China in Ottawa published a statement praising the so-called patriotism of these Chinese students who attacked my freedom of speech. In fact, my speech was about evidence of China's well-planned, organized, ongoing genocide in East Turkestan. What is clear is that the Chinese Communist Party has encouraged a large number of Chinese students that study in our country to export their propaganda and China's autocratic value to our Canadian soil. They actively try to undermine Canadian democratic value and the freedom of expression. Chinese police threaten Uyghur Canadian students also from 5,000 miles away. Those Uyghur students constantly harassed through video call that asked them for their school address and information about their status in Canada. Some of them even had no choice but disown parent-child relationship officially to protect their parents and back home. Chinese cyber espionage also was very active for many years. They used it to keep sending me viruses, destroying my computers and emails, especially my blog. Chinese trolls used to threaten me through Twitter and YouTube for many years using words such as be careful, you are looking for your their own death, and I used to ignore them and block them. After the McMaster incident caused huge media attention, they have changed their tactics and started claiming that I am a CIA agent and funded by NED and creating fake news, despite that I'm not getting any funding from any organization. I am giving this testimony here today, not only because of my personal safety or other human rights activists' safety, but also most importantly, it's because of tremendous danger that China posing to the democratic world order and human rights, Canadian sovereignty. It is about future of our kids. That's why the Canadian government should cover Chinese agents working for the United Front and pushing the Chinese community to manipulate to influence the Canadian democratic system for the benefit of CCP, bring them to the court and pass new legislation to define their activity as a crime. The Canadian government should expel the Chinese diplomats who investigate and encourage the Chinese community and the Chinese students to intelligence gathering, to block the CCP influence and espionage activity in Canada, as well as to deal with the digital authoritarianism that enabling Uyghur genocide. Canadian government should focus on the potential complicity of Canadian universities with hearings. Universities should be required to report all cooperation with Chinese research institutes and companies in artificial intelligence, big data, smart policy, and smart cities, biotech, and other fields. The Canadian government should support Canadian academics, students, and the journalists and activists, same time, should crack down on China's illegal espionage activity and China's funding of fake Canadian NGOs and individuals who deny China's Uyghur genocide, attacking human rights activists, and spread fake news and the Chinese State Party propaganda in Canadian soil. Thank you for giving me opportunity for testify. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Turdoush. We'll now go to our first round of questions. We'll start with Mr. Jenis for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for their courageous advocacy and important testimony. Ms. Lamo spoke about the serious problem of conflation of anti-CCP sentiment with anti-Asian racism and the way in which the government of China seeks to co-opt progressive discourse to cover for its own deeply racist and colonial policies. Last week in question period, we saw in response to legitimate questions raised about national security issues, we saw this kind of conflation between anti-CCP statements and anti-Asian racism advanced by the Prime Minister himself. And we know that this false conflation is itself a serious threat to Asian Canadians. The idea that Asian Canadians are somehow an extension of the CCP is a deeply racist idea, and it also feeds into the government of China's narrative, which seeks to compel Asian Canadians or threaten Asian Canadians to do its bidding. So I'd like to hear from both of the witnesses what their response was to the Prime Minister's comments last week and what we can do as politicians to clearly establish the difference between criticizing the CCP and anti-Asian racism. Do you want to answer, Lima, or you want me to answer? I would like to answer for this question. I think our Prime Minister is really confused. I don't think it should be CCP and Asian racism has to be considered or seen as together, because the CCP, that's the Communist Party that ruling the Chinese people and manipulating the Chinese community and in Canada and elsewhere. And the Chinese people and the CCP are totally different. Even most of them are brainwashed, they're manipulated. So if we against the CCP, that does not mean we be against the Chinese people. It's nothing to do with the racism or Asian and anti-Asian or anything. So I really didn't get it why he said that. Ms. Lamo, do you want to follow up? Yeah.
Thank you, MP Jenis, for that question. If you want to tackle anti-Asian racism, the solution or the first way to address that is by listening to the Asian voices in your country, your constituents. So folks who claim to be standing up against anti-Asian hatred or racism, please listen to what your constituents, listen to the Asian voices. As an Asian woman, let me tell you, there is a bigger target on my back, and conflating the idea of anti-CCP to anti-Asian is actually much more of a further disrespect to Asian folks, because Asia is much larger than just China. There are 40 other different countries. And so that is not just a disservice to other Asian Canadians, it's also a disservice to Chinese Canadians. There is a serious issue. There has been a huge rise of anti-Asian sentiments, over 700% rise in, I think, in Vancouver areas. And so how are we addressing that? Are we just going to be getting stuck in the politics of what is anti-Asian or anti-CCP, or are we going to start addressing the actual issues that are being faced by Canadians? Simple as that.
Thank you very much. I think that is such important testimony, and I hope it's taken to heart by all members and by parliamentarians who aren't part of this committee. I want to ask specifically about what happens when a person is a victim of foreign state-backed interference. We've talked in the past about Motion 55, which is a private member's motion I've put forward to try to push for greater coordination, supports, and a strategy. Because we've heard that there just often isn't the support there. Who do you call when you experience these kinds of things? What kinds of supports come into place? If you could both share, and I've got probably enough time for 45 seconds for each of you, how you tried to access support from authorities, what kinds of experiences you had doing that, and how we can do better supporting victims.
Thank you. In my remarks, I didn't refer to some of the actions, concrete actions that folks can take, because I've done multiple testimonies as rights activists speaking against Chinese colonial violence. And to your question, MP Janice, I've personally spoken to Toronto Police, RCMP, CSIS, folks. I've just been pointed from one direction to the other. I've spoken to multiple parliamentarians, and till this day, I can guarantee you that I have not received a single piece of paper that has said, here you go, Chimmy, these are all the threats that you have received. These are all the criminal offenses, because these are death threats and rape threats, and folks that have actually personally messaged me and told me, no, BITCH, I am here, when I said, oh, are these just online? And so these are personal messages. And so I don't know where I can, how many times I have to tell you these folks, tell you this again and again. And as a psychology student, let me tell you, these times where I have to retell my story all the time, it is triggering and traumatizing.
Thank you. We're almost out of time. Ms. Turdish, do you want to quickly chime in on this? And then I say as well, we should bring in the amnesty report as well, because I think that is very important.
I'm sorry, that is the time. So we'll have to go on. I'm sorry, Mr. Hopefully someone else may ask you that, or Mr. Jens may get another chance. We'll now go on to Ms. Zan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming to the committee today, to the witnesses. As a female politician and parliamentarian, I too have been the subject of many threats and death threats, harassment, misogynistic social media posts, to the point where it's been very, very difficult to handle. So I know how you must be feeling, and it is not a pleasant thing at all. And I want to acknowledge that nobody should have to go through that. And as women, they often use the same threats, believe me, over and over and over again. It's like regurgitated. It's like bots or something like that. And they just say the same thing over and over again. So, you're not alone. That said, too, I want to ask you about, what are the threats that your families or activists receiving back home? Could you perhaps expand on that a little bit? Perhaps maybe Kimmy, could you go first, and then Ms. Turdish? Thank you.
I'll keep it short so Rokeya, you can have more time. Thank you for that question. For me personally, displacement comes with a cost. I personally have never seen Tibet. I am Tibetan descent, but I've never seen Tibet, and getting a visa to even access that is challenging. My parents' first cousins, who are my uncles, my first, second, and third cousins, I don't know them. I yearn to be able to know them someday.
Thank you. Ms. Turdish?
My direct family members in Canada, but I have relatives and close relatives back home in East Turkestan. My entire relatives and back home received threat and punished heavily back home. I was raised by my grandmother, but I didn't contact with her since 2009 because after the Chinese police officers pressured her and told her that you have to tell your granddaughter to shut up. If not, you will have trouble. So like once she told me that, I cut the connection with her. But I didn't shut up, of course. But I didn't contact with my grandmother, and she passed away after 1 year that I stopped the contact with her. All my cousins and the friends cut the connection with me because of my activists, but because police bother them whenever I do phone contact with them. Even I didn't talk any sensitive issues, but most of them are arrested, and most of them, not all of them, maybe some of them I didn't contact. I don't know they are arrested or not. Arrested in 2017, and this is happening to every Uyghur Canadians or other Uyghurs in diaspora. And this is exactly what is the example of China's genocidal intention of cut the connection, break the lineage, and break the origin.
Can I ask? I don't have much time, but I'd like to ask. I know that the CSIS and the RCMP have taken measures to promote their 1-800 numbers to students that are experiencing academic harassment. So have you or any of your colleagues had the opportunity to use any of those numbers? And I'm told that ISI is actually better at integrating national security considerations into research partnerships. So, what do you advise that we do to try and improve things?
Simple answer, no.
The 1-800 number isn't working, or you have tried? Or?
We haven't. No, not a single agent has referred me to that number. I recently actually spoke to global affairs officials where there were RCMP members who suggested. However, in terms of what you can do, please refer to page 51 of the harassment and intimidation report of the Amnesty.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Turdish, have you tried the 1-800 number, or has anybody?
No, I didn't.
Does it work? Has it helped?
I didn't, and I never think about it. And when the McMaster incidents happened, I just worried about my son too much because it's disturbing when they look for my son. Sure. But so I did police report, but after that, some people suggest me you have to go to the court, but I was thinking this is not a civil issue. This is not the issue between me and that international Chinese students. This is a China's influence to Canada, so government should deal with it. So I didn't go to the court. And I think the Canadian government should give more power to CSIS or other agencies so they can shut all the loopholes that Chinese espionage is infiltrated into Canada. So I didn't do anything.
Thank you. From your testimony, I gathered that there does need to be better coordination between our public institutions, universities, law enforcement agencies, security agencies, and tackling foreign interference. And CSIS does have an academic outreach program, which often holds conferences or workshops to tackle these topics. So their recent outreach to post-secondary institutions is a good example, I think, of how CSIS is trying to connect with important stakeholders to ensure that Canadians remain safe and that our interests are protected from foreign-based threats. So perhaps if we had time, you could provide any suggestion that would increase the coordination between the agencies and the universities.
Yeah, that will be better. I think when the Canadian Intelligence Service and the other Canadian agencies, when they have more power, when they coordinated exchange information, so we can have work together and block those Chinese influence.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zan.
And now we're going to move on with Ms. Normandin for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to both of you for being with us today. You're an example of strength, particularly in the circumstances that you find yourself witnessing in, and we have to use that as an example. I'd like to start with a question about the involvement of the CCP in terms of the actions that are taken against you. They congratulated some of the MAC students, but some people thought they could have organized some actions themselves. It might have happened just organically. I'd like to hear what you have to say about examples that really lead you to believe that it was the Communist Party involved? Was it really structured? Did something really happen as if there was a trigger in terms of the actions that happened? I'd like to hear about those examples. Thank you.
Yes, this is a very good question. I would like to answer this. I really suspect it was organized and by the Chinese embassy or consulate, because I received a screenshot those Chinese students doing in WeChat group, and somebody did screenshot and sent to me, and all of them are Chinese Student Association students. And there's somebody, some people has no name, and somebody in that. During my speech, when the guy recorded my speech video and sent to the group chat, and somebody said, how come there's a lot of people in this room? Chinese embassy already, he said, in Chinese, Yi Jing, already told us to report this event to the Chinese Student Association and the school. How come they don't want a lot of people come to this speech? They don't want this event happen. So it was told by the Chinese embassy to those students and instructed what to do in advance. So that's why I'm thinking this. I suspect heavily it's instructed by the Chinese embassy. And those students right away, I didn't do anything. I didn't give media. I didn't do anything. These students right away published a statement in February 13. And then, like they said, we told the school and we sent the letter to the Chinese embassy. They say it that too. So they have very close contact. They report everything to the Chinese embassy, and the Chinese embassy instructed them in advance to many things. So that's very obvious. That's why I think this is not the organized patriotic Chinese students. There is a Chinese embassy's hand in this event.
I can give you two short examples. One, personally, accounts of people within my circle who flipped 180 degrees when it became international news. So folks who wanted to actually be part of my slate, I'm sure you folks are aware with elections. So they wanted to be part of my slate because I was running as president. And 180 degrees started asking me for actual statements about what my stance was on Tibet. That was my personal experience, and knowing that they were facing intimidation themselves about their families back home. And number two, in 2017, I organized an event in U of T downtown with Lobsang Sangye, which is a former Sikyong of the Central Tibetan Administration. And within one overnight, we had students show up protesting against the event. But then when I questioned them and welcomed them inside the event, they chose not to. Instead, they had no information about why they were there. Simple as that.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I don't have much time, so I'll ask you two questions in one. You talked about tactics, sometimes that are even more insidious of the CCP, for example, by discrediting you or spreading fake news rather than threatening you or attacking you directly. I'd like to hear what the consequences that you could expect if these tactics became even more insidious. And to fight this, would it not be good to have a one-stop shop for complaints? Not just to give you advice, but also to keep statistics so that we can inform Canadians about what's happening and for them to understand that the situation is quite real.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for saying that, because that is actually part of some of the recommendations in the report that was submitted to the Global Affairs on March 2020. And that's actually an updated report. There is a recommendation for developing a centralized focal point within the government to support as just a start. Then those are the low-hanging fruits. We haven't even addressed all of the other concerns that talk about investigations, independent public investigations into harassment, and also looking at the instrumentalization of international students and how they're being used. And in terms of the insidious ways, as a Canadian, let me tell you, I'm in organizing spaces, and police and all these levels of security that you have, the highest of the highest, are not able to support me. Instead, I'm teaching them about international geopolitics, which is not something I'm getting paid for. And in a personal space, where do I belong? Where do I go if even within the spaces where I'm talking about housing justice, people are like, you're racist to me because I'm talking out against the Chinese government? Where do I go? Please.
Perhaps quickly, in terms of statistics about complaints, could it also help to make your situation more credible with respect to Canadians?
Yes,
Sure.
Yes, sure. For example, I collected from my community and from myself, like the bunch of screenshots from the social media, what they said, how they changed their tactics. For example, after the McMaster incident, they changed their tactics because it caused huge media attention.
Merci.
So the China
Thank
started
you.
to be careful, and then they changed their tactics. They're not swearing at me, that threatening at me anymore.
I'm sorry, Mr. Trudeau. I have
Sorry.
the next question. Merci beaucoup, Madame Normand.
Thank you very much, Ms. Normandin.
For 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both of you for coming to testify at our committee. It's certainly a brave thing to do. I know you've been doing it for some time, so I commend you for your persistence as well. Let me first ask Ms. Lamo a question, Chair. And you did talk about how you ran for president of the student union at the University of Scarborough. I was a student politician too. I'm assuming you weren't running on a Tibetan platform, that you were running on a student platform. Am I right about that, or was there elements of that in part of your program?
You're absolutely right. But prior to that, I've actually been the Racialized Student Collective Coordinator. I was the Vice President Equity. I'm a tri-campus athlete. I've been serving the Chemistry Society and the Pre-Med Society as well in leadership positions.
So you had a very broad background of leadership that was important to your leadership role or potential leadership role, and you were elected. And did this harassment start after you were elected, or was it part of the campaign as well?
This could actually answer part of Ms. Normandine's question as well. The night of the elections were over, there was some sort of connection to the Chinese embassy because there was a petition that started overnight at the end of the elections. So because they came to find out that there's a so-called pro-Tibet person or a Tibetan person running, they found out at that time. And then there was a petition which had 10,000 signatures by the following day. And when my results came out the following day, of course, my social media accounts were bombarded with threats.
So the petition was signed by 10,000 people. That is an awful lot of people. And is it your belief that those 10,000 individual people either existed or actually existed, and that they were somehow or other corralled by the Chinese government or Chinese Communist Party or Chinese agents acting in Canada? Is that your understanding of what happened?
For sure. I think the latter, Jack. You just mentioned that you're a former politician. And so you know how hard it is to get students to go out and vote. I was rallying for 3 straight days, and it was actually my Tibetan New Year, Lunar New Year. I coincided with that. In my traditional garb, I'm here saying, let's go out and vote, trying to get people to vote. And we had a turnout of max 2,000 people. And the petition is that 10,000 people who are against me for some reason, saying that they're against my views as a Tibetan person.
And were they, did they have Tibetan names? Were they actually Tibetan students? They were Chinese students or Chinese individuals? You don't know? No,
don't know. And we actually, in the activism spaces, we say that that's the 50 Cent Army, right? Most likely bots, folks that are, being pressured actually by the Chinese embassy to make these comments and threats.
Well, I mean, I'm just concluding from a practical sense that seems to be a very significant effort by someone to organize such a thing. And were these people who identified themselves by name, or was it just some sort of a pile-on? I don't know how social media works for petitions like that, but they were, you think, individual, that many individuals who were influenced to do that.
So eventually the petition was taken down, and the person who started the petition initially wrote out a statement. However, in regards to the tens of thousands of signatures, I'm not sure. They could be bots. And in terms of Tibetan population, there's about 3 max Tibetans out of the 14,000 individuals on my campus. And on my social media accounts, however, I did have experiences of students who had their U of T cards, so their student cards on their social media pages, and they were sending me death threats. And that's exactly how I knew, Jack, that these are actual students on my campus threatening me and security, whichever level, even your government's level, did not do anything to sort of protect me from these students who are roaming around freely.
Now, I wonder out loud, and we're looking for trying to find out what protections there are for people in such circumstances like yours. I would have expected that the university itself would take such harassment of one student against another, particularly as you point out, death threats being made by people who are fellow students of the University of Toronto. They would take that as very serious and significant discipline matters. Was that the case, or were the university authorities involved in any way?
University authorities were involved from day one because of my prior involvement as Vice President Equity. I had access to these individuals, which is a privilege in itself. However, when I talked to them, there's two incidents I recall. One, the head of security said, this is above my pay grade, when I told him that this is possibly a much bigger issue than they think, than just bullying or cyberbullying, which I think already is a big issue. Number two, I was given a walkie-talkie, which I was asked to go to the campus security to get new batteries for when it ran out. That was supposed to keep me safe. So I'll leave it at that.
So there was no investigation done by the university. I mean, they were talking about this campus security now, but I mean, this seems to me to be something that would be very likely above the pay grade of an individual security officer. But the president of the university would be probably very upset if one of his students or her students were receiving death threats from another. When I was at university, that was a serious matter. That would have been a serious matter.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We'll now have to go on. We'll have to go on now to Mr. Chu, and we're in the second round. 5 minutes, Mr. Chu.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming. My first question is for Ms. Turdush. How much of what you have experienced is evidently actioned by, I'm just grouping it by three groups of people. The first one is traditional ethnic Chinese who've been in Canada for, say, multiple decades. The second group is brainwashed communist Chinese, I call it. Or the third one, the CCP, United Work Front, or Council General. So what you have experienced, evidently, what do you think the first, second, and third groups?
This is actually a very difficult question because I don't have any contact with the Chinese ethnic community. Most of the threat that I receive through the social media, and when they threaten me through social media, we don't know what kind of person, what is their ideology, where they belong to, right? So I was thinking most of them as pro-CCP and loyal to the CCP people. If usually Chinese Democrats and the people not loyal to the CCP, I have some Chinese friends too, they support me and they don't say I am NED funded CIA agent or they're not going to swear at me. They don't do that. They support me. So there is a people like that, but I don't know exactly which one is which. But there, like you said, there is a people who do not support the CCP, and there is a Chinese people who support the CCP. Most Cantonese people, they support the Uyghurs and what's happening in East Turkestan right now. So it is very clear there.
Thank you. My second question is for Ms. Lamo. To the trolls of the CCP proxies, the 50 Cents Army, as you referenced, any good suggestion? And these are, let's just assume that these are people who live in Canada here. Any good suggestion that you have for government to deal with these people, to make them understand that the limit of freedom of speech versus criminal actions?
I think lead by example, right? When the government takes concrete action by implementing legislation to counter covert Chinese government interferences, and there are examples led by other governments like the US or Australia that you folks can take and implement within the Canadian government, and that will have a ripple effect within the Canadian constituents. People will understand the seriousness of the issues, the human rights violations that are happening in China and in Tibet, in East Turkestan, in Hong Kong, wherever else there is happening. And with that, I believe that Canadians will also learn more about what is actually happening and why we're doing what we're doing. And when that happens, I think we can start creating a space of safer spaces and communal healing where people know what the difference is.
Okay, thank you. Now, my third question. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Mr.
I would
Dish.
like to quickly add something. And also Canadian government should educate those communities and the people too, because they cannot differentiate the crime between speech freedom. They said, okay, you're anti-China, anti-communist party, but I support them. That's my speech freedom. That's why I'm attacking you. So many Canadians, not only Chinese people, not only ethnic Chinese. I saw so many Pakistani too. They're supporting Chinese Communist Party and distributing fake news and attacking me and through social media. And these people are YouTubers, influential people, So the people has to be educated. Education is important too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I was looking at the RCMP's National Security Awareness page, and in there it did list out the 1-800 numbers for you to call, but it actually prefaced it by saying if you suspect you have encountered terrorist planning activities, please call 1-800-420-5805. So let me ask you, are you aware of this National Security awareness page, and if so, have you called that number? And under what situation? Either one of you, very quickly for 15 seconds each.
I didn't.
Okay.
No, the answer is. However, I've met with various RCMP investigators and officials who have never given me that number.
Thank you. I do have constituents who complain to me that they are being ping-ponged between the RCMP and the CSIS people. One force tell the other to the victims to actually
exactly
approach the
my
other.
case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chu. Maintenant, Monsieur Lightbound,
Mr. Lightbound, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. First, allow me, while I have the floor, to echo what Mr. Genius said at the beginning of the meeting. I think it's really important. We have to not fuel the confusion between politics and the actions of a state, particularly internationally, particularly when anti-Asian sentiment is on the rise in Canada, which shouldn't be the case. And this is true for the Chinese state. We have to be able to criticize them with respect to international law. So I would like to echo everything Mr. Genius said. First, thank you very much for witnessing today and for your courage for appearing before our committee. My first question is for you, Ms. Turdish. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. You talked about the difficulties that some Uyghur citizens have. They're victims of harassment from the CCP and their fear of reprisals with respect to their family. What is the best way to move forward so that harassment can be reported in Canada without Chinese authorities getting involved?
Those people are all afraid, and they cannot tell the Canadian government. They don't want to report to the Canadian government even. Many of them told me secretly, but they have no courage because their parents were kidnapped by hostaged by the China. So as I told my statement, some kids even disown the child-parent relationship. They went to the lawyer in Canada. They got certified letter, and sent to China that they are not my parents, so that they can, the Chinese government erase their name from the residential papers, so they're not going to bother their parents anymore. They were thinking in this way that they did, and many of them were very scared. Like I just said, they could not they could not report to the government. So I think it is important, parliamentarians and politicians like you, to introduce the bill about the protection of Uyghur human rights, which is similar to the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act that US Congress passed last June. It will mobilize the action to stop genocide and stop China is taking hostage and kill Uyghur family members and back home, and endorse multiple steps to protect the rights of Uyghur Canadians, including investigation and accountability for Chinese officials involved in the harassment of Uyghur Canadians.
Merci beaucoup pour la réponse très concrète.
Thank you very much for your very concrete answer. My next question is for Ms. Lameau. You mentioned in a recent podcast that prevention is better than the cure. So yes, we have to investigate when there are investigations, but also prevent these incidents from happening. So what's the best way to do prevention? You talked about Australian law against foreign interference. For the sake of this committee and to have this on record, what could we do to better fight against Chinese interference?
Thank you for that question. I think reciprocal access to Tibet is one where we have sanctions that are being placed, expelling diplomats. There's also examples within that has been passed in the U.S. administration, this Tibet Policy Act. And here I'm not speaking on just behalf of Tibetan people. There are so many other oppressed people that are being subjected to violence from the Chinese state. So we're talking about East Turkestan, the Uyghurs, the Hong Kongers, the Taiwanese. And when I think about Hong Kongers, there are 300,000 Hong Konger Canadians that are struggling inside. And so we have to think about this in a larger scale.
Merci. Puis peut-être une dernière question.
Thanks. One last question. You also mentioned the last time you were before this committee that there were some people in China or Hong Kong that were arrested for publications on social media. Could you give us any more information about those type of arrests?
Pour que ça soit dans le rapport.
That it's in a report as well.
I'm sure you'll get more information in the following testimonials after this by the Hong Kongers, because there has been a lot of arrests of Hong Kongers. For Tibetans, Dashi Wangchuk is a case that a lot of people have known about. He's a language right activist. He was actually just a shopkeeper in Tibet and in China actually. And what happened was he was imprisoned for 5 years simply because he wanted his niece and nephew to learn Tibetan at their school. And like I said in my remarks at the beginning, they're all being erased from Tibetan.
Merci very much. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur Lightman. Nous tournons maintenant, Madame.
Thank you, Mr. Lightman. Now we'll go on to Ms. Normandin. Thank you very much, ladies, for your answers. I'd like to hear what you have to say about which of the following two scenarios I'm going to present better reflects reality. First, people who are of Tibetan or Uyghur origin in Canada, if they say nothing against the CCP, they're left alone, they have a happy life, and they'll not be worried about anything. Or, second, is it not almost everyone who's a bit under surveillance and then things can get worse? The closer you get to power, regardless of whether you're for or against the CCP, there could be greater surveillance, harassment, and threats. Which of the two scenarios is the most applicable?
These two scenarios, I understand, but applicable to where? I'm sorry, I didn't get at your question. Okay, could you make it?
Pour des ressortissants.
For Tibetan or Uyghur citizens, if they're in Canada and they say nothing against the CCP, are they left alone, or is everyone being surveilled? And the closer these people get to power,
everyone being to surveillance. Even they are left alone. They didn't. If I am the human rights, I am under surveillance because I'm human rights activist. All of the Uyghurs under surveillance. Maybe SP, the Australian, they reported they stole something from China. Actually, they said there is 10,000 name list that and this 10,000 list there's more than 7,000 of them the Uyghurs names, including many Canadian Uyghurs. Those Canadian Uyghurs, and most of them are not activists. They were scared of China. They have family members. They were very quiet. They were still under surveillance. They didn't do anything. And then also in this March, the Reuters wrote one news that Facebook told Reuters that the Chinese hackers, they're surveilling, they're stealing information, less than 500 Uyghur activists in Facebook. We don't have the 500 Uyghur activists in Facebook. Few of them, most of them are not activists, but are still under surveillance, and the Chinese government is stealing their information.
I'd just like to quickly add number 2 for sure. In order to survive or just thrive in this society, you're being targeted. So even if you're silent, you're still going to be affected when you start to become more successful in life. If Miss MP, if I were to say, you can't bring your Quebecois identity to the table, that's not fair. But that's happening to us.
Thank you, Ms. Lemo. Pardon me, but that will now go to Mr. Harris for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to ask both of you this question. I'll let Ms. Turdish go first because I didn't get to her last time. You both have been persistent and both have been quite open and brave, and you've been commended for that, and you're doing what needs to be done. Can I ask you whether or not you feel any more heartened by the activities of the last year or two, the exposure of some of these questions, the work that this committee is being done to bring the matters to the forefront, the attempts to convince the government to make things, and perhaps a report that we might be able to make to urge changes. Do you feel any heartened by that at all? And I can let you answer first, Ms. Turdish, and then Ms. Lemo.
I didn't, but I feel very slow. Our government going very slow on these acts, and then not fast. So, like China has a huge influence on China going very fast, but our government, I don't know, the gathering information maybe that they don't have enough information, enough evidence maybe. I don't know. That's why it's very slow, but I'm still happy.
I want to echo those sentiments. Yes, heartening. However, at what cost? Today, if there is another student that goes through the violence that I had to go through, are they still going to be just given another walkie-talkie and expected to stay safe? The reason why I'm speaking out and becoming a further bigger target, probably will never be able to go back home if I wanted to, for speaking out, is because that someone is in the hopes that someone else would not have to go through this. No other Canadian should ever have to go through that.
Yeah, because more our government response is more slower, is our action going to be more hardening? So that's what I want to say, like Lemo said.
So I guess, and I'll just leave this as a comment because I only have a few seconds left in my intervention, but I guess the responsibility then is for us on this committee and for the Government of Canada to respond to these circumstances in the best way we can, in hopes that we can improve things so that you and your people in your circumstances, both of you and all of your people, don't have to go through this, and we can hopefully effect some change.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. We'll now go on to Mr. Williamson for 5 minutes. Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lemo, a couple of things you said that I'm really curious. You said you had photos with student IDs issuing death threats to you. Was that correct? And there was no follow-up from the police or any national oversight police body in this country? You're nodding, but could you just say something on the record? I want to get that, because that is astounding. We had the RCMP commissioner here some weeks ago, who the best you could say is more needs to be done. And you're saying you had actual students on campus IDs with these statements, and nothing was done. Is that correct?
I could give you more concrete results if any of the reports or the investigations done by various levels of security were actually given to me or I had access to. So till this day, I don't have any piece of paper that shows them. However, friends have sent me screenshots of folks liking those comments of death threats on my social media posts that are probably still on till this day available publicly, where they have their student IDs actually on their social media pages. So yes, in short.
All right. And then something else that Mr. Harris said, and you didn't quite have time to follow up, but you did say it was his question regarding why didn't the university president or some senior administrative official do anything, and your comment was international. I don't know if you can say international students. Were you suggesting this is the almighty renminbi, or what? What was your comment? And if you could just maybe finish your answer to Mr. Harris's question.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. To Mr. Harris, there were some investigations. However, what is the purpose of investigations if there is no impact? And international students have a huge say in how the academic institutions perform. I could go on about a national education strategy and what the government should do for post-secondary education, but this is not my space. However, you can see that international students are now becoming cash cows instead of actually providing a free and good education for young leaders, which will be leaders of tomorrow and today.
Right. So you both raised some interesting policies, solutions. One I'd like to address, though, is that it seems to me that the CCP has managed to effectively use our institutions and our democratic freedoms against students in this country. And when you have a coordinated campaign like that, is one solution not for the Canadian government to begin to say no to more Chinese embassy officials coming to this country, who even if are nabbed by the police, in many cases can't be extradited or pardon me, can't be charged, can claim diplomatic immunity. Like what's the solution here? Is it to have fewer embassy officials that are able to coordinate students in this manner, and then have officials focus more on the affairs of state? What are your thoughts on that? To both of you, please. If you could maybe keep your comments to about 40 seconds, 45 seconds each.
Simple as reciprocity.
I think that's affirmative, yes?
Okay,
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And Mr. Yes, Mr. And can you talk just a little bit? I believe I read that after your harassment, your university, did they sanction or did they close the Chinese Student Association? Is that correct? Can you talk why that happened and how that went down?
Yeah, I think like the other student associations and the school gave promotion to the Chinese Student Association and asked them that you cannot organize and that you cannot do those kind of activity anymore. I think the probation is 1 year, or I don't remember right now. I didn't participate their probation, so the school did that to those Chinese Student Association. They opened the hearing, opened the court, and they decided through.
And could you give us from the background? What was that? Because they were deemed to have engaged in activities that weren't becoming of in an academic environment?
Yes, because the Chinese academics and the Chinese Student Association in McMaster, we had, like I said, we had a screenshot evidence is what they did, how they connect with the Chinese embassy. They proved that with their own statement too, and they tried to stop the Hong Kong students too after. So like they involved those kind of issues very actively. That's why.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williamson. Et maintenant, Monsieur Dubourg, pendant 5 minutes.
And now, Mr. Dubourg, you have 5 minutes. Mr. Dubourg. Thank you very much, Chair. It's my turn now to congratulate both of you, ladies, for your courage and for everything you're doing so that this freedom and democracy is protected. It's very brave of you. And my first question that I'm thinking about, I know that you're very involved at the university. You mentioned very eloquently all of the threats that you received, you and your families. The fact that you're here this evening before our committee, do you think that people who are threatening you will be aware of this? Are they sitting in front of their TV to follow you and to continue their threats? Do you think this could happen, or do you think it's not really important? How do you see that?
Madame Lamour d'abord.
Ms. Lamour, perhaps first.
Well,
Go ahead. Lisa.
Okay. I was thinking they don't have to directly show up front of you. For example, they secretly said in their group chat, look for her son. So I was thinking when they say that, I right away think about what Saudi Arabia did to the Khashoggi. So those kind of governments can do any kind dirty game. That disturbing me a lot. So they might not gonna, like, we are not, they are one of the province, right? They're not gonna openly do something here, but in long term, they can do something very harmful. That's disturbing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Merci, je vous en prie. Et vous, Madame Lameau?
Ms. Lameau?
Just wanted to echo those same sentiments and also just add on to that by saying the mere fact that I have no access to my own family members and my generation of Tibetans are not knowing how to speak their own mother tongue. That in itself is the violence and the aftermath of what they're doing. So a direct threat is at this point for me manageable, which is unfortunate to say even in a society like this.
Okay, d'accord, merci.
Thank you. Ms. Turdish, you spoke about your son. I'm not sure how old he is, but I know you seem very concerned about him. But in your son's entourage at school, is he safe? Does he report certain activities of his friends at school?
He was a student of McMaster before, but at that time he was doing, he's working in Boston. And then when the event happened, he come back. Right now he's master's student at University of Toronto in downtown campus. But because downtown campus and University of Toronto, there's a lot of Chinese people. I don't want to say every Chinese people are dangerous or Chinese espionage, but I'm still worrying and I'm telling my son, don't be friends with the Chinese people sometimes. And he said, are you crazy? Why the country in 5,000 miles away has to control me? I am Canadian. Why they have to control our soil? This is crazy. You're crazy. And he doesn't believe that. But that's why I'm worrying, because he was thinking, some country in 5,000 miles away and they have to control me. Basically. So like this is that's why I'm just very worrying about him. But it's not only about my son. It is if they expand their influence like that, every kids, what's going to happen to the future of our kids? Because they are right now intensely developing their AI technology. They're controlling everybody's brain and manipulating everyone in Canada and the globe, you know.
Merci. Une dernière.
Thank you. One last question quickly. Given you're very involved at the university in Toronto, at University of Toronto and at McMaster, but what do you think about the role of institutions? Do you think, in terms of these threats, well, what do you have to say about that?
As I said in my statement, the government should ask every university to report their cooperation with the Chinese institutions and the Chinese universities, what kind of area they are. They have cooperation, what kind of research. This is not about only the student safety. This is about the Canadian information, how they're stealing our information, you know. So they have to, yeah, okay. I don't have time.
All right.
I'd say
Thank you.
Put your money where your mouth is in your diversity inclusion statements.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Dubourg. And I would like to thank our panelists, Ms. Lemo and Mr. Dush, very much for your appearance here today. I think you saw how much members of the committee appreciated you coming. And now we will suspend while we connect the next panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Suspend for 2 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
our second panel this evening, we have Cherry Wong, Executive Director of the Alliance Canada Hong Kong, as well as Kyle Matthews, Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. Thank you both for being here. Let's start with Ms. Wong, and perhaps you'll correct me if it's Sherry and not Cherry for the opening remarks. You have 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Mr. Chair, Sherry, thank you. Thank you for inviting me again to speak to the committee. Before I start, I want to make clear that the diasporic communities are not a monolithic group. With heightened geopolitical tensions, we need to prioritize the protection of the diaspora and dissident communities from the CCP surveillance and intimidation, and be critical while not fanning xenophobia. I was asked to speak about harassment and intimidation today, but what I'm about to tell you may not be what you're expecting. Dissidents are not safe, not in their own homes, not in civil societies, not at work, and not in Canada. This is because threats, censorship, intimidation will continue as long as companies, nonprofits, academia, politicians, media, and other institutions with vested interests are fearful of angering Beijing and doing their bidding. Beijing is effectively exporting their authoritarianism overseas. From previous meetings, witnesses from Canada's intelligence and enforcement agencies assured the committee of their collective effort in combating foreign interference. With my lived experiences, I can tell you existing institutions and legislations are not working. Beijing's foreign influence cannot be addressed with blanket policies, as the CCP operates across sectors and often within legal gray areas, making bans or criminalization largely ineffective. Last time I spoke about Beijing's global expansionist authoritarianism, their blatant disregard for international rules-based order, their influence and interference operations in Canada, including my own experience of surveillance and intimidation. Beijing's capabilities, capacities, and ambitions already pose a dangerous threat, but few countries fully see their global strategy of influence. The CCP has been testing the tolerance of liberal democracies with their authoritarian overreach as international norms are being rewritten. Current approach to China lacks a comprehensive view from the diasporic communities that speak the language, understand its history, culture, and intentions. Activists have witnessed these influence efforts since the 90s. It's not new, but only newly realized. In ACHK's most recent report and recommendations, we covered service level examination of 7 aspects of CCP's foreign interference in Canada: political influence, elite capture, surveillance and intimidation, information and narrative discursion warfare, academic influence and vulnerability of intellectual property, national security, and the Unite Front Work Department. We found similar tactics, strategies, and operations throughout the different sectors. We need a whole of government approach in how Canada engages with foreign authoritarian powers like China. We need to invest in the proper tools, infrastructures, and resources to protect Canadians and our national interests. Canada has an important role to play on the international stage, as multilateral action are an effective way to confront Beijing collaboratively. But it is imperative to expand Canada's foreign and domestic policy toolbox to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Our recommendations are as follows: create legislation for foreign influence transparency scheme, a public registry of individuals, organizations, and representatives who are acting on behalf of foreign states in Canada. The transparency scheme should be paired with a public commission with investigative and enforcement powers, serving as a centralized point to coordinate the different levels of government, Canadian institutions, public agencies, and the general public. Supporting Canadian research and intellectual property with a cohesive federal policy to regulate research collaboration with foreign actors while increasing funding for Canadian innovation. Investing into resources and infrastructure for ethnic communities in Canada. Protecting Canadians by placing restrictions on foreign actors from the collection, purchase, or export of Canadian personal information and data. Harassment and intimidation of Canadians need to be understood from the perspective of dissidents. We need an approach to foreign interference that centers the community's needs while addressing the issue holistically and strategically. So thank you again for having me. I am happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wong. And we'll now go to Mr. Matthews for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. C'est un plaisir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. My first comments will be in English, and then I'd be very happy to speak both languages.
The Parliament, thank you for the invitation to give testimony to the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations. I lead the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies at Concordia University and applaud the committee for studying issues related to national security dimension of the Canada-China relationship, including cyber-enabled influence operations, espionage, cybersecurity, foreign interference, and harassment. I think these things and many democracies around the world are dealing with this right now, and no one quite has an answer. The rise of authoritarian China poses an existential threat to Canada's values, interest, including the respect for human rights, the rule of law, and the future of democracy. That can't be said enough. In March 2019, my institute hosted Dolkun Issa, leader of the Uyghur World Congress. The Chinese consul general contacted me by email the day before the event, seeking to urgently discuss the event. I ignored his email, only to find out that the next day, the Chinese consulate in Montreal had put pressure on the mayor of Montreal to have our event canceled. Thankfully, no one succumbed to this foreign interference. And I had follow-up with Canadian officials, Global Affairs Canada, CSIS, and the event was covered by the US State Department in their annual reports on human rights in China. That incident that happened to me and my colleagues follows other examples from Canada and around the world where the Chinese government has purposefully attempted to curtail academic freedom while simultaneously stomping upon our fundamental human rights, including freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, and privacy, to name just a few of those human rights. Since 2019, Canadians have seen 2 of our citizens locked up for over 900 days, a deadly pandemic kill over 3 million people across the planet, disinformation campaigns targeting democracies in an attempt to foster mistrust in our own democratic institutions and the media, as well as to sow distrust in belief in Western developed COVID vaccines. We've also seen economic warfare against our ally Australia for having the audacity to call for an international investigation into the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. We have seen similar blowback and retribution against Canadian politicians, US and European officials for labeling abuses against Uyghurs as genocide. We see a very aggressive China that we haven't seen 4 or 5 years ago. These actions by China, and by particularly, I don't mean the people, I mean by the CCP, reveal that the government there is a hostile actor with far-reaching implications for Canada and our allies. While this committee is tasked with an immense challenge, that is what should Canada do about China? Let me offer a few insights. China is trying to win a global competition to be a tech leader and exporting these technologies across the planet, as well as in Canada. It is imperative that a more robust response is taken to limit the export of Canadian technologies to China, and we work with our democratic allies to counter digital authoritarianism. We must not allow Huawei to establish Canada's 5G network. Both the Czech Republic and the Netherlands are examples that we cannot ignore, where privacy cannot be guaranteed. I'd like to talk about genocide and surveillance. All Chinese companies that have been found to have assisted Beijing in the surveillance and persecution of the Uyghur Muslim minority should not be allowed into the Canadian market or to provide financing and cooperate with Canadian universities. Tencent, Hikvision, Huawei, iFlyTech are all documented in having offered their services to Beijing's genocide and are complicit in these crimes. This past weekend, the Globe and Mail reported that iFlyTech is funding projects at Queen's University and York University. This is unacceptable. The same concept should be applied to Canada's pension plan contributions that are being invested in companies involved in Uyghur genocide. This is not a good look for us. Last but not least, Facebook recently announced it had taken down a coordinated cyber harassment campaign targeting Uyghurs living in numerous Western countries, including Canada. We must develop operational capabilities to protect Canadian citizens from surveillance and online harassment and to expose who is behind these actions. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews. We'll now go to our first round of questions and begin with Mr. Williamson for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both our witnesses for coming forward today. Mrs. Wong, could I actually ask you to talk about your personal experience being harassed, threatened by individuals, and could you just talk about that a little bit? It's important for us to hear your stories so we can understand more than just kind of the statistics, but understand what individuals who are speaking out face in Canada.
So long before I was executive director of ACHK, I was a local organizer in Ottawa, where I organized a couple of protests and we were invited to speak to the press. And I found soon after I have spoken to the media, I would get hundreds of messages on my social media. These are very explicit messages, anywhere from calling me demo crazy to play a pun on democracy, to anywhere trying to rape me and my mother like pigs and slaughter us in our sleep. So it's been very tough being an activist to speak about Hong Kong issues when this is the kind of threat I face online. Despite so, online harassment is not, as we know, is widely not addressed by the police agencies. Last time I was in committee, I also spoke about when I traveled to Vancouver, where a teammate had booked my hotel room. But 2 days after we have done the launch of Alliance Canada Hong Kong, a strange man called my hotel room, identified me by name, identified me by my room number, and said they are coming to get me. Those were the exact words being repeated. I did what I was supposed to do. I called the Vancouver police and said, I feel danger and I don't feel safe. They said they would send officers to my location. They did. I never met the officers. They were dismissed at the hotel lobby because that was not a real threat. That was not an issue that they would address because not a criminal issue. I called again and there is no follow-up. To today, I cannot forget those words that were said to me on the phone. We are coming to get you. It was very explicitly a form of intimidation, but it was very carefully crafted because it is not criminal in intent. And that is how they are able to get away with it.
Thank you. I can tell that's difficult and not a pleasant experience, but I appreciate you sharing it again and parts of it with us again. What's your feelings when you hear, your thoughts when you hear senior law enforcement in this country talking about the need to do more, but then nothing happening? We saw the commissioner of the RCMP here a few weeks ago, for example, who admitted more needs to be done, but that seemed to be it. Meanwhile, stories like yours, we're hearing more and more of them, and people don't know where to turn to for help or for support.
Like I said, these kind of harassment attempts are very carefully crafted. Despite there has been very real death threats against dissidents, the police has also said that there's nothing they could do and there is no first steps to do to protect these individuals. We know policing doesn't work, and this is why we recommended a foreign transparency scheme paired with a commission, because this type of information cannot really, we can't let it go. We can't let these stories go, and we can't let this kind of valuable information go without sharing it with the public. The public should know how many Canadians feel unsafe and feel that they're being harassed. The CCP is only one regime. We know other governments are also doing these types of behavior, and we need federal data collection on these types of issues.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Matthews, I assume it's probably Professor Matthews?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I corrected myself. Then, Mr. Matthews, what you mentioned in your opening remarks that there is an existential threat towards Canadian values. Can you explain what you mean by that a little bit? Because that suggests a near and present danger in terms of our way of life and the freedoms that we take for granted far too often.
Well, I think if you look outside of our borders, we're seeing a rise of authoritarian countries, and we're seeing a decline of democracy. And there are several powerful authoritarian states. Russia is one, but China is predominantly the most powerful right now. It has deep pockets. It's buying off other countries, and is gaining a lot of influence within the United Nations. We see how it's held up any investigation of the COVID outbreak at the WHO, or control took a year for the WHO team to arrive. We've seen, some things going on at the Human Rights Council. So I'm saying when an authoritarian state that clearly doesn't believe in human rights, it's, what's going on to the Uyghurs, what's going on in Hong Kong, other minorities, and exporting those values with other authoritarian states, that's a big problem. That's why President Biden recently said that we're going to see the democracies versus autocracies is going to be the fight of this century, and we're seeing more and more countries kind of wake up and realize that the power of China is so immense that we can't, they pick people, they pick individual countries and just target them. The case of Australia. Banning Australian wine imports, beef. Now they're going after the iron ore, which is Australia's the largest. They're using targeted economic measures as well as arresting citizens to get their way. To me, that's a threat.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We'll now go to Ms. Yip for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you to both of the witnesses for coming this evening, especially for the small sacrifices of a hockey game and a soft couch. I'd like to direct my question to Ms. Wong. In your opening statement, you mentioned that dissidents are not safe, not in Canada, and you have just told Mr. Williamson about your personal experience. Are their experiences similar?
Yes, we have threatening plays against those who have spoke about the humanitarian crisis in Hong Kong. Recently, a Toronto Star article featured an individual who faced death threats, reported it to the RCMP, and no action was taken. So these are very real harassment and intimidation tactics, but there are also intimidation tactics that are a little bit more subtle. For example, someone who went to a protest, their boss would ask them, "Why did you go to the protest? And if you go again, I might have to fire you." It's not necessarily the boss being a Chinese state agent, but they're afraid that in association, their employee who chose to side with Hong Kongers may anger Beijing and may threaten their business relations. And this is why I said it is not safe for them at work, in civil societies, in academia, and so many various sectors, because these kind of harassment and intimidation happens not only through explicit threats, but also implicit and lateral surveillance and policing.
Recently, the RCMP had come to our committee and they talked extensively about a 1-800 tip line. Have you had an opportunity to use that, or the other dissidents? Is this tip line even known?
This tip line is known to me, as I do a lot of research into this sector, but for our average community members, no, they do not know about this tip line, and many of them do not trust the tip line either. Many of us have been sent from department to department. For example, I was sent from Vancouver Police Department to the RCMP to CSIS, back to Vancouver, and all over again. Our community don't have trust in the policing agencies because so many times we have reached out for help and they have let us down every single time. And we know that policing won't work on incidents such as your boss threatening to fire you because in fear of Beijing, though that is foreign influence, but that is not a criminal offense that could be charged by the RCMP or any policing department.
I'm very sorry to hear about your experience as well as your other co-dissidents. At the committee, they also mentioned that there are increasing reports of investigations into foreign interference. Do you think that there are more cases, or do you think that the threat has always been present, but now more people are more confidently able to come forward because of maybe media attention?
Foreign influence from China has explicitly been happening since the 90s. Soon after the Tiananmen Square massacre, they realized that they needed to control overseas dissidents to ensure that there is a lesser resistance of Beijing's regime. So this has been happening for a very long time. It has increased in power since Xi Jinping has taken over, but it is deeply embedded in various sectors in Canada, and it has to be looked at as a holistic issue and not an individual policy issue.
So would you say that where you find that the community cannot go to the police. I acknowledge there needs to be more work to be done for sure. Would you consider that part of the gray area that you mentioned in your report?
Absolutely. There are a lot of incidents of harassment where it doesn't qualify as criminal offenses. And this is why we need an external tracking and an external commission to deal with these types of gray zone issues. Foreign investment is not illegal either, but when a foreign actor is buying up large amounts of Canadian data, then that is something that we need to look at. And we need someone who is not law enforcement, because they don't look at it from a black and white they look at it from a black and white perspective. We need someone who's able to navigate the nuances and look at individual cases rather than a systemic issue.
So these behaviors are not covered by the Canada's criminal code or any other legislation. Is that right?
Many of the activities are, but like the previous panel has said, there are explicit death threats and the policing that nothing. So criminalizing these events obviously does not work. But there are many activities that are outside of what would be considered a crime under the criminal code. For example, my family may get harassed after I have appeared here in committee, but that is not a criminal offense.
Okay. Do I have any more time left?
Only 15 seconds.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your answer, and I hope to hear more recommendations from you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yip. Et maintenant, Madame Normandin.
Now, Ms. Normandin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank our 2 witnesses this evening. I'm happy to see them again. I saw you at the Immigration Committee, but I have a question for both of you. Either of you can jump in when you wish. First, generally, I'd like to talk about the level of organization in terms of the response that you get to your activism. What leads you to believe that it can't be something organic? It may just be a small group in civil society, but that it's really state organization.
These operations are very well coordinated. In one of my previous submissions to CACN, we recorded a weekend of events that happened globally. Hong Kongers called for a globalized event on August 6th, we called for a globalized solidarity event. And on August 13th to 16th, the days of the event, globally, over 10 countries were harassed. All of these protests were surrounded by pro-Beijing crowds who has almost the same slogans, almost the same posters. Some events, they even came with rubber pads ready to have physical altercation with the Hong Kong protestees. I understand, we could say that they are exercising their Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I am only able to tell you what I can see, which is on the surface. But there are very large coordination efforts behind these operations because you see them very prepared. We see businesses offering free meals after these protests. We also know that organizations such as the Chinese Student Scholar Association and other United Front associated groups would actually threaten individuals who do not show up or threaten individuals who dare to go and support the pro-democracy movement. So it is a very coordinated effort. It just is, it's difficult to see because a lot of these operations happen in Chinese and it's through Chinese social media on WeChat, Weibo. So it's difficult to spot.
Merci. Rapidement, puisqu'on est devant.
Quickly, since we're looking at something that's organized by the Chinese state and it's state-run, does it mean they also need a state answer, a state response? Because civil groups that get organized here against the CCP really don't have the resources or the strength to respond to the threats that are being made.
I think we do need a federal response because we see this coordination not only happening in Canada as well, it's happening in our ally countries. So we should create a multilateral response for this kind of question. I think first and foremost, we need to center the needs around the community. Many individuals are coerced into participating in these pro-Beijing rallies as well. If they don't show up, their families would be threatened. If they don't show up, their scholarship would be pooled. So I want to present that very human side that, CSSAs are mobilizing these activities. There are other United Front groups mobilizing these activities, but not all participants are really supporters of the regime, but they're rather forced to.
Merci. Madame Wong, je pense que vous avez écouté le panel.
Ms. Wong, I think you were listening to the panel just before, and you heard me talking about collecting statistics. I'd like to hear what you have to say about the importance of having a centralized focal point for collecting complaints, even if it's not federal, just something structured so that people understand the extent of these threats.
Absolutely. One of the proposed recommendations we have is a public commission on foreign influence paired with the transparency scheme so that they would actually act as a registry body for foreign actors to sign up to ensure that their activities are recorded here in Canada. But that commission could also double as a community support. So community groups like ours who have faced extensive violence from the CCP and their affiliates, we are able to have a place to report these issues and ensure that they're kept on record despite not being criminal offenses. And that kind of data will help inform Canada to make better decisions that improve our national security.
Merci. Peut-être une question pour Monsieur Matthews. On voit
a question for Mr. Matthews. The CCP has been able to limit freedom of expression here, particularly for Uyghurs and people from Hong Kong. But do you fear that this will spread to anyone who wants to have freedom of expression in Canada? It may even cover more subjects.
Being held up there, so I don't know if I'm allowed to talk or not.
One minute.
Listen, I think this is playing out on the internet across the globe. But today I read Jamestown Institute shows that the Chinese government has 2 million paid internet commentators, 20 million part-time volunteers to engage in internet trolling. So when people express something online, make a comment, even in a Canadian internet sphere, there are people swarming them, trying to stop them from speaking, and the harassment gets so bad that they just no longer comment on it. So it is about freedom of expression. You can weaponize social media, bots, and real people to silence others. So this is also a big problem, and there's discussions about why the Chinese authorities get to use social media platforms that their own citizens aren't allowed to use.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Normandin.
Thank you very much, Ms. Normandin.
To Ms. Kwan for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. My first question is to Ms. Wong. I'm very sorry, first off, to hear about your experiences of the threats that you've encountered for both yourself and your family. Now, we had a situation that's similar to that in Vancouver, in the sense that a concerned group came out to criticize and call for the resignation of a former judge who happened to be an advisor to the premier, who is a genocide denier for the Uyghur people. After that group came out and spoke publicly, one of the members received death threats. In fact, at least 2 death threats. They reported that to the RCMP, and there just seemed to be very little follow-up with respect to that. And the RCMP, of course, did not deem the threats to be of sufficient level to require follow-up, even though the group wanted the RCMP to further look into the background of the person who made the threat, who made multiple, at least 2 threats, and then that request was never responded to. So I wonder, Ms. Wong, what are your thoughts about that, and what role should the federal government play, if any, in those situations? Because the electeds will say, "Don't come talk to me, go talk to the RCMP," but the RCMP is not following up. What should be done?
We need strong advocacy for dissidents who are facing these difficult situations. I can speak from experience. The individuals who are facing these threats have never felt more alone. We have nowhere to go. We're talking to you today, but tomorrow we would be talking to RCMP and asking for help and begging for help and be denied for it. We need a federal strategy on foreign influence because, again, harassment is only one corner of this massive iceberg. It's a threat that you face at work, being, overlooked for a promotion because you didn't You didn't go to this pro-Beijing protests. It's death threats who are overlooked and deemed as irrelevant. The community's hurting, and I just hope the government could look at the recommendations that not just myself and my organization is putting forward, but the various witnesses who came before you who survived these violence. We need your support, and we need it now. We can't wait any longer until someone really gets hurt.
Thank you. On the House of Commons, as you know, had voted on the motion to declare that there's genocide taking place with the Uyghurs in China. A number of MPs refrained from voting. And particularly, I note that some of my colleagues from the Chinese Canadian community did not vote for this. I wonder what your thoughts are around that. Do you think that there's any potential implications with the pressure to which they may feel from the Chinese government?
I'll preface this answer by saying this happens to every single party. No single party is vulnerable or not vulnerable to CCP's influence. Every single party is. And from my report, I can tell you that we have recorded various incidents of political influence on the federal level, on the provincial level, on the municipal level, down to the school board level. So when I see that many colleagues of yours did not vote in favor of the announcing the Uyghur genocide, I see it as some form of pressure that they have felt. It may be through political donations that they would receive on a campaign period. It may be volunteers that the United Front activities are able to mobilize them. It also may just be they have a job lined up after their career as an MP and they don't want to piss off the investor. There is a range of answers to your question, but it is a trend that we have observed, not only in the House of Commons, but also in the Senate.
And what would your proposed action would be to address those kinds of pressures for electeds?
I believe we need a federal policy to address all forms of foreign influence in a centralized place, because these actors are often the same and coming from the same organizations or same network. So a foreign influence transparency scheme and the public commission that pairs with it will be able to enforce these registrations if an individual organization or an actor is associated to a state, to a foreign state, that they need to register. And if they don't register, there should be enforceable and punishable offenses, maybe a fine, maybe revoking their charitable status. But these kind of issues cannot be buried under bureaucracy, but instead we need to bring them to the light. And everyone in Canada should know that who is doing these kind of influence operations with their political officials.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews, do you have anything else to add to what Ms. Wong has said?
Yeah, I think we need to see a serious investment by Canada we've seen some interesting money coming to Heritage Canada deal with online disinformation, misinformation, and build citizens' capacity. But what we're dealing with here is something different. We don't have any program that's helping any Canadian NGOs, any think tanks, or anyone to really look into this and to dig deep and try to map out who's doing what. So I would just point that. Public Safety Canada had something for counterterrorism to help people study this and understand it and be action-oriented. We're not seeing anything yet, so hopefully that might come about.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Thank you, Ms. Kwan. We'll now go on to the second round. We'll start off with Mr. Chu for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming. My first question is for Ms. Wong. Ms. Wong, your organization, the Alliance Canada Hong Kong, had published a report, In Plain Sight, Beijing's Unrestricted Network of Foreign Influence in Canada. I wonder if you could table a copy for the committee's record.
It has been tabled. I think it's just waiting for translations.
Thank you. In the section named Information and Narrative Discussion Warfare, which is around page 17, your organization covers the diaspora media, the ethnic Chinese media in Canada. Now, I happen to understand that June 4th is coming, and it happened 32 years ago in 1989. But since a few years ago in Vancouver, one of the two radio stations broadcasting in Cantonese and Mandarin has started to refuse promotion activities for commemorating June 4th. Or maybe, for example, last year's newspapers have turned down advertisement countering support for Hong Kong's national security law. What's your view on that? Your report had only one very small section of it. Have you heard about that, and what's your organization think? And maybe perhaps after you answer, Mr. Williams too.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yes, unfortunately, it was a very small blurb, but there are a lot of ways that the information and narrative discursion warfare is being conducted here in Canada and in Western liberal democracies. To answer your question, I know that I noticed the same kind of issues where Chinese language media here in Canada, whether in Cantonese or Mandarin, has been refraining from certain topics. It is a part of the larger warfare against Canadian media, not only through harassment and intimidation of certain journalists who carry out these stories, but also systemically buying up Chinese ethnic media as a way to silence the information that is going out to the community. So it is a systemic problem. It's not only for June 4th, but it is an ongoing concern of the community to see that the only access we have to Chinese language media is now in danger because it has been bought up by CCP affiliates.
Thank you, Mr. William. Mr. Matthews?
I can just make general comments about this. I think there needs to be a lot of attention to what's happening in minority language media in Canada. It falls off the radar. Most people who are native English or French speakers aren't following it. And so we really need to have an attention and focus on that, see what's going on, see the ownership, what global narratives are trying to be framed or controlled. But once again, I think there's some work starting to be done by Heritage Canada on this, but I haven't seen enough besides just a few university researchers.
Right. In your view, is these propaganda, CCP propaganda running in Chinese communities in Canada effective, and what effects would prolonged exposure of the CCP propaganda have done to Chinese communities or Canadians in general?
Are you asking that question to me?
Yes.
I'm not studying the Chinese Canadian media,
okay.
but the only thing that you can see is that it creates a gulf in how the Chinese Canadian community might see reality and how everyone else would. And that is also not good for social cohesion, where you might have more polarization. So we have to be very careful about that.
I ask you that because there are some legislators who are proposing Canadian government banning not just CGTN, mouthpiece like that, but also banning WeChat.
Yeah, so, I haven't. There's a wider discussion about reciprocity, that social media platforms or media is not open in China, and that as open societies we're being exploited. So there are those debates going on. I don't know where I stand on that. I think
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wong. One just in the remaining 15 seconds, foreign influence and infiltration, there's another section there about elite capture, etc. They are not limited to Chinese diaspora or ethnic Han Chinese only. Is that correct? In other words, it's colorblind. They will welcome any infiltration. Am I correct?
The wine and dine happens with Canadians and Chinese communities alike.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chu. On continue maintenant avec Mr. Dubourg.
We're continuing now with Mr. Dubourg for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I would also like to pay tribute to Ms. Wong and Mr. Matthews, and thank you very much for being here this evening and for your contribution to our committee with your testimony. I would like to start with you, Mr. Matthews. You spoke about this activity, which was organized with the chair of the World Congress for Uyghurs and the consulate, etc. But I'd like to know, since that incident, did you see any other type of intimidation from the Chinese citizens or management? No, since that event, with what happened, we sent a journalist from La Presse to do an interview with the general consulate. And, well, what happened, it was really ridiculous. So we re-invited Mr. Dokanisa to our institute, but we saw on several occasions there were groups related to extreme Marxist-Leninist left-wing groups that had problems with them. I can't say whether there was an alliance and all of that, but what we've seen is mostly online. People who criticize us, people who talk about the Uyghurs, and they send us lots of things, and there's a psychological impact as well. But we did not receive the same pressure from the general consulate. We are also aware of threats that Ms. Wong or others are experiencing. You've often talked about a coordinated response to take action against China. And one of the things you mentioned was, for example, with respect to the organization of the 2022 Winter Olympic Games. Do you think this could have a lot of importance, bearing in mind at the same time of the situation of the two Michaels in China who are still imprisoned? I would like to, well, the Uyghurs and the genocide and the two Michaels, that's another thing. They're stuck right now, and we want to protect both of these citizens. But for me, I think that if we do send athletes to the Beijing Olympics, it sends a terrible message. What's happening in Hong Kong and with the Uyghurs, how can we live with this? And we know that the Beijing government wants to have the glory with this event. They're very angry, we've seen, against the members of the Canadian Parliament or members in the UK. So they're paying attention to what the world thinks of them. So I support the things that Mr. Cutler and his team are doing. Perfect, thank you. So they are really tuned into our actions as well, yes. And one very last quick question. Ms. Wong, you were talking a lot about digital authoritarianism of China, and you mentioned Huawei, the 5Gs. Well, are there other companies, Chinese companies, that we should also be somewhat concerned about, that are in areas that collect inappropriate information? Huawei, in my opinion, is the most important because it is involved with telephone information and private data, but also Tencent is a company that wants to grow, and the ONU had to set it aside because that company was involved with pressure on Uyghurs, and also we have a lot of new AI companies that want to come to to our country, and Montreal and in Quebec as well. We really have to pay attention to that. But I think Huawei is obviously the most dangerous, but there are others. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Now, Ms. Normandin, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you very much. I'd like to know the whole question of the Uyghur genocide and everything that's happening in human rights. It's not necessarily something that just anyone would be aware of. I'm talking about my family at the Christmas party. They're not necessarily aware of all those things, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about social media, the tentacles of the Chinese government may be growing, and they've probably improved their tactics since the 90s. for example, in terms of scientific freedom and environmental issues. They want to change international discourse. Do you think there's awareness that should be happening with respect to everyday Canadians in terms of all of China's actions? Are we lacking awareness, social awareness, and education in this respect? I think if you look at around the world, not just in Canada, most people are looking at China. They don't really have a good perspective.
Of citizens across the world, Canada included, to show that that populations are totally have unfavorable views of the Chinese government. It's part of COVID. It's part of the Uyghur genocide. That's really exploded, and campaigns against the fashion industry that's using slave labor. So there's a combination of factors, and you see this everywhere: Western Europe, Asia. So it's a dangerous time for the Chinese authorities because they've been acting in a way very authoritarian, and they're making many, many enemies, and not just among governments, but among individual citizens. But on the issue of genocide, I'm not sure if the average Canadian knows the details of everything that's going on, but it's pierced people's conscience, and attacks against journalists and politicians. It's not a good look for Beijing.
Madame Wong, vous voulez dire quelque chose?
Ms. Wong, did you want to say something?
Social media has always been a tool of the authoritarian regimes. They're able to use bots to create misinformation. And this is one that actually, like you said, should be doing this kind of education, because everyday Canadians are individuals who can choose between a slave labor made product and a non-slave labor made product. They are the people who are going to be investing into foreign actors, and they should be knowing that whether or not they are associated.
Sorry to interrupt, but I have to go on to the next member. Ms. Kwan, you have 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Ms. Wong about self-censorship from the local Chinese media. Does she see that happening, especially on reporting out issues that may be critical of the Chinese government?
Absolutely. Self-censorship has been widespread in the Chinese ethnic media because many journalists have families or friends who are still in China and PRC-controlled regions, and they're afraid that if they speak up, that their families and friends could be endangered.
Thank you. And from that perspective, how can we address that issue, or is there any way that that could be addressed in such a way that we can ensure the freedom of democracy and press is actually respected here in Canada?
There's actually a very simple solution to this very complicated problem. Fund ethnic media. The reason why it has been so infiltrated by the CCP is because they have been bringing in the resources that the Canadian government and Canadian local communities have been unable to provide. We need to build a community resilience against these kind of misinformation and selective reporting. So providing more funding, providing support as a larger issue of foreign influence will also help address the issue. But I can't stress this enough. We need to put money into ethnic communities, especially right now as we talk about how the CCP has really hurt dissident communities.
Yeah, this is a particularly important issue because many of the Chinese Canadians who read the local press will only just see what is reported. And if there's self-censorship taking place, then that information and what is taking place in terms of concerns with respect to China is not getting out to the larger public. And sometimes it could even be skewed. Have you observed that some of the reporting is in fact skewed towards in favor of China?
I'm hesitant to say skewed because I have a very strong perspective. So I may not come as a very impartial examiner, but I can tell you that many members of my community have had very violent confrontations with Chinese language media journalists who were pushing the limits. They were asked to not film their faces, but the journalists shoved the camera into their face. That type of behavior is also observed.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kwan. We'll now go on to Ms. Stubbs for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you to both of the witnesses for being here. It's just, it's overwhelming, isn't it, when hardly even knows where to begin to start with questions. Sherry, I'm struck by your point, your repeated point, and Kyle's yours too, that this state infiltration from the China's communist regime is not new, that it has been going on since the 1990s, intimidating and threatening people in China and around the world. It must feel like authorities and governments don't actually grasp the seriousness of this when, as individuals, you're sent between a variety of law enforcement agencies and different offices and offered a tip line. But, you know, you see things like in the US where they've made actual arrests on Operation Fox Hunt, and just our government says that, you know, it needs to do more, but it's hard to identify if those things are actually happening. Sherry, can I ask you a question about the discussion of all of this? You know, like others have said here, I think this is real new news to a lot of Canadians, maybe shamefully for all of us. But I think it's really our obligation as members of Parliament to be asking hard questions about this and getting to solutions like you have both proposed. Do you have any comments about what can be the conflation of legitimate questions about the safety and security of individuals and national security posed by the communist regime as anti-Asian racism? Do you have any views on what that does to the conversation, or trying to get at the facts and get to solutions?
As someone who is Asian, who is a dissident of the CCP, and who is a Canadian, I have often been asked to choose sides, that I can only do one and not the other. I think first and foremost, we need to put a difference between the Chinese communities, the ethnic Chinese communities, versus Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Uyghurs, etc. That has often been conflated as one, and it's really harmful. And to put a difference between these communities and the CCP. In fact, the Chinese people are victims of the CCP regime. We are living in such horror because of the CCP. So holding the CCP accountable is, it needs to be a separate discussion from the conflating it as an Asian racism issue, while this geopolitical tension have definitely triggered a rise in anti-Asian racism. And this is why we have to be very careful in the terminologies that we use, in the intentions, but also knowing that intentions is not everything. Sometimes the action itself will be enough to hurt the community. And that's why always I center the community's needs, center the dissident community's needs in all of your policy decision making, because we're the ones who have been bearing the brunt of these kind of attacks and harassment and influence.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. And you outlined a number of possible solutions for policymakers to take in your opening comments. I wonder if you might want to expand a little bit on what would be the benefit of a national registry for foreign agents, and what you call the transparency scheme would actually look like, how it would work, and how it would benefit the safety and security of people.
I think one of the previous members have mentioned that Canadians don't really understand foreign state actors and don't really know who they are. And this is why we need a transparency scheme to point out who they are, to point out these organizations who are receiving funding from state actors. After knowing that information, Canadians can make informed decisions. This means municipal actors, school boards, federal MPs like yourselves. During a election campaign, you don't know who's coming to volunteer, but having that public access to a list will help you identify the foreign actors. And this could be expanded to, say, making a registry of lists of known human rights abusers, of military actors, and encouraging the Innovation Canada to not collaborate with these actors. But we need public information in order to take real action.
Chair, do we have any more time? I was just going to ask Kyle if he wanted to expand on other solutions.
In 15 seconds.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Just look at the case of York and York University in Queens. They got in bed with a Chinese company, an AI company, that's repressing the Uyghurs.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Fragiskatos, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move to ask questions to Mr. Matthews. Before I do, though, and I didn't think I'd need to put this on the record. Perhaps I don't. It should go without saying, but I will put it on the record. Every MP I've had the privilege to work with over the years is loyal to this country. That, of course, includes MPs of Chinese heritage. I think it's a privilege to work in this place, Mr. Chair. I defend colleagues across the aisle. This isn't only about Liberal colleagues that I have the chance to work with. It's about all MPs and all parties. We hold a loyalty to Canada, and everything we do is for our constituents. And I put that on the record this evening, Mr. Chair. Mr. Matthews, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. You used a phrase there, digital authoritarianism. I don't think you're the first to use it, but it's still something that piques my interest. Can you expand on what you mean by that when you say that China is pursuing exactly that type of an agenda?
Yeah, it's a new term that's aroused in the last year and a half, but it's basically the authoritarian use of emerging technologies, AI, facial recognition, algorithms, looking at machine-driven communications. That really is authoritarian in every sense of the word. It's going to control. You have no privacy. Everyone's being surveilled, and it's being rolled out. It's being tested on the Uyghurs. Human Rights Watch did a massive report on algorithms imposed on apps to capture the facial images of Uyghurs. We're seeing emotional technology to read emotions. So it's this whole set of emerging technologies that it's hard to abuse those in democracies because we have civil society and journalists and opposition parties, but in a one-party state, the government can tell engineers or whoever design this to do exactly this, and there's no ethical rollout or any consideration. So that's what's happening. I wrote a piece about this and what Canada should do for opencanada.org. I'd be happy to share it with the group, but it's an emerging issue, and my institute's doing more and more work on this, and I know Global Affairs Canada is starting to get involved on it as well.
Well, I'll be happy to look up the piece on Open Canada very happily, but perhaps in 2.5 minutes you can summarize the main essence of the thesis in that piece. What should Canada do to counter exactly that? And are there efforts carried out by China to have Canadian firms, perhaps at universities as well, assist in this effort to bring about a digital authoritarian approach?
Well, there's definitely a lot of interest to capture research at Canadian universities as well as American universities on certain technologies that can be used for military purpose or for controlling populations. I put on a conference 3 years ago with the AI community and had an AI firm in Kitchener-Waterloo that was aggressively approached to sell stuff to China on facial recognition. They decided not to. They thought it would be misused, that none of the safeguards were. There needs to be some kind of democratic consensus and alignment to stop the use of these technologies for nefarious purposes. We need to have export controls for Canada so our technology is not misused for this. And I think we need norms and regulations, and there's a whole talk about having a digital Geneva Convention to limit the use of AI-powered drones and killer robots in warfields. But it spans from privacy, surveillance to automated weapons.
I have just over a minute remaining, if I'm not mistaken. You said something in your opening testimony. You pointed to firms that have been involved in producing some of the technologies that are now being used in the persecution of the Uyghur minority and the genocide of the Uyghur minority. Could you elaborate on that? And do they have a presence in Canada?
Huawei has been
certainly, yeah,
found guilty of surveillance of Uyghurs. Tencent has been found guilty. The UN had to push them out over the 75th UN anniversary because of that. Human rights groups raised concerns. The iFly tech, which was mentioned at Queen's and York, is also in Canada in universities. They've been involved, and so is Hikvision, a facial recognition technology that got a major a deal for the European Parliament to put in facial recognition cameras to detect COVID heat off people's bodies, and it turns out they were involved, and the EU had to cancel that program and that budget because they were involved in monitoring the Uyghurs as well. So it's pretty expansive.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajaskatos. And let me thank the witnesses very much for your appearance this evening. It's deeply appreciated. I'm now going to suspend for 5 minutes for the clerk to connect the next panelist, as well as a 5-minute quick health break. If you can get back sooner, that's even better. And I should tell you, the clerk's advised me we have to stop at 9:30. We have a hard stop at 9:30. See you in 5 minutes or less.
For our last panel today, we have the Honourable Member David McGuinty, Chair of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, and Sean Jorgensen, Director of Operations, Secretariat of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security and Information.
McGuinty, you may now proceed with your opening remarks. You have up to 7 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and honourable members of the committee. Thank you for your invitation to appear this evening. C'est avec plaisir que je vais vous parler.
It is with great pleasure that I will talk about the work of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, also known as NSICOP.
Known as NSICOP. As this is my first time before your committee, I will provide a brief overview of the committee and proceed with outlining our 2020 annual report, as well as our 2019 review of foreign interference. I will also touch upon recommendations we made regarding ensuring the integrity of our elections. As you know, colleagues, NSICOP was established in 2017 and is composed of parliamentarians from both houses. Members all hold a top secret security clearance and are permanently bound to secrecy under the Security of Information Act. We cannot, under any circumstance, claim parliamentary privilege in a case of unauthorized disclosure of classified information. La responsabilité.
The main responsibility of our committee is to conduct studies in the national safety and information milieu and the organizations that form it. The reports of NSICOP are unanimous and nonpartisan. Our 2020 annual report was mainly focused on national security threats in terms of what has changed in recent years and what was the impact of the pandemic on these threats.
Security and intelligence organizations described 5 main threats to Canada's national security when the committee began its work in 2018. They were terrorism, espionage and foreign interference, cyber threats, organized crime, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. I will focus on espionage and foreign interference and cyber threats as likely being of most interest to this committee, but encourage you to consult the full report. Espionage involves the theft of information, while foreign interference involves the use of clandestine means or threats to promote a certain objective. However, the perpetrators often pursue them in tandem. The committee conducted a review of foreign interference in Canada in 2019. It found that foreign interference posed a significant threat to the security of Canada, and that continues to be the case today. The pandemic has also created opportunities for foreign states to target Canada's health sector, most notably in the area of vaccine development. Turning to malicious cyber activities, there are a wide array of threats facing Canada. I note that the committee is currently conducting a review of the government's cyber defense. Russia and China remain the most significant, sophisticated, and state-sponsored threats, targeting government and non-government systems. State actors also conduct online disinformation campaigns in Canada and among our allies. Let me now turn to our review examining the threat of foreign interference in Canada and the government's response to that threat presented in 2019. The committee agreed to focus its efforts on traditional person-to-person foreign interference. Of particular interest, we highlighted China's Operation Fox Hunt. It involves clandestine and coercive repatriation activities targeting apparent economic fugitives and corrupt officials, including in Canada. Chinese security officials carry out the campaign in a number of ways, including police and prosecutors working with the RCMP to arrange to meet fugitives to purportedly gather evidence and discuss their cases. In response to Fox Hunt activities, Global Affairs Canada established an interdepartmental working group that met regularly to discuss the campaign. The RCMP imposed increasingly stringent criteria on PRC investigators, yet activities continued. Nous avons constaté que
We noted that the government's response to the threat of foreign interference was considerable and sustained. It was done on a case-by-case basis, and our mobilization in terms of other levels of government and the Canadian public was limited. The committee recommended that the government establish a cross-government strategy to fight foreign interference and to strengthen the resilience of institutions and Canadians as described under Section 297. With respect to the risk of foreign interference in our democratic processes, allow me to mention the Jim Judd report, which was written in pursuant to public protocol with respect to major election events. States who try to interfere in Canada's election process use several methods, including trying to influence people running in ridings, or in terms of promoting a candidate or hampering another candidate. They can also take efforts to try to spread hate or accentuate partisan differences.
This happens to all parties across all orders of government. The committee supported recommendations to reestablish the public protocol well in advance of the next federal election and to extend its mandate to the pre-writ period. The committee also believed that the government should consider ensuring that the mandate of the protocol include all forms of foreign interference, consider including prominent Canadians as members of the panel, ensure that all parties understand the purpose of the protocol and the process for raising a potential issue, and consider how the panel would inform Canadians about an incident of foreign interference. Mr. Chair, to conclude, threats to the security of Canada are fluid. They change. These are all things which we parliamentarians from across the political spectrum should continue to pay attention to and to seek ways to address through our hearings, our work on legislation, and our engagement with Canadians. Finally, Mr. Chair, before going forward, hopefully for questions, I want to remind you and members these reports, both hard copies of which were sent to the members, are 230 pages in length. They comprise 456 paragraphs in one report, 125 paragraphs in another. And all of this work is predicated on 28,000 pages of documentation and dozens of witnesses and experts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGuinty. Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, nous commençons.
Thank you. Now we're going to start with our first round of questions with Mr. Paulus. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Hello, Mr. McGuinty, and thank you for being with us today. The report is rather clear, and also it's public and doesn't contain any critical information, so top secret clearance is not necessary, obviously. So to help you a bit to clarify things, I'd like to make a parallel with what's happened in Australia. First, Australia was a victim of cyber attacks. Political parties were attacked. And also, there's a paragraph in your report that mentions that there was a direct impact right in the midst of a pandemic in June of 2020 against schools, companies, hospitals even. So my question is, can we draw a parallel here in terms of what's happened in Australia? And well, could we experience the same type of attacks here? Thank you very much for your question. The simple answer is yes. Anything's possible in Canada. We cited in 2019 in our main recommendation to government the example of what Australia did to create a more centralized system, a more coordinated leadership system to deal with everything surrounding the issue of foreign interference. And we put forward that model for the government's consideration. I think Minister Blair circulated a document of 18 or 19 pages describing what the government has done since that report was released. But with what we've seen, anything is possible. Right now, what we're seeing in Canada well, if we look at what's happening in defense and what's happening in different departments, we think that it's urgent to pool our efforts because there's a lot of silos happening, something that happened 2-3 years ago. But perhaps there's another way we can do things in Canada that could create issues, because we always think we're no one's enemy. But what we've seen in the report, it's clear we're also a victim of attacks. And it's not just from China, but yes, there is China, and we're talking about that today. But in the report, they also mention the possibility of an attack that could happen when there's a conflict, when there's an armed conflict, for example, between states. And we've seen in the United States, they were directly attacked on their pipeline, and there's no open conflict. And Canada, should the hydroelectric or oil system could they experience such an attack even though there's no armed conflict involved?
The report sets out the risks inherent to Canada's critical infrastructure. It highlights what has taken place in other jurisdictions. It even highlights the fact that our communications security establishment played a critical role in finding and detecting threats to American critical infrastructure and shared it with the United States. So in the report, yes, we lay out very clearly some of these, the magnitude of some of these threats. And we also, of course, have a number of prescriptions in our 2019 report on how to deal with these. And chief amongst these, to go back to what I said earlier, sir, is we need a central, coordinated, pan-Canadian approach to dealing with the question of foreign interference. Okay. And we need to get it now.
Okay. Parlons d'interférence, justement, l'interférence.
In terms of interference, particularly election interference, right now we're talking about influence on several levels of government, not just federally, but also provincially. The provinces are rather independent in the way they're managed. And I think there have been discussions with certain individuals that have serious concerns in provincial governments because they're also victims of cyber attacks and influence on their territories. In your recommendations, you've also pointed to something that we could do to help our provinces. Yes, in 2019, we clearly described the challenges. There's the federal government and risk communication with other levels of government in Canada and the public in Canada. And what we did in response to the Judd report, we also made recommendations to improve the composition and the mandate of the panel that was created to receive complaints and information if there's a cyber issue or other types of issues during a federal election. We still have much progress to make because we noted in the report that foreign interference in our political system and in our elections does happen with all political parties at the House of Commons, and it happens at all levels of government. Last question quickly. Do you think that the Chinese Liberation Army is an important actor behind all of this? And if I may, Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Jorgensen to answer that question. I think he has more to say about that.
Actually, I'm sorry, we're at the end of Mr. Paulus's time, but perhaps we have another opportunity for that. I regret it. We're over the 6-minute point, just over. So now I have to go on, I'm afraid, to Mr. Right, I'm happy to do so, of course, but I regret leaving Mr. Paulus. We'll go on to Mr. Fageskatos for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I didn't hear any regret in your voice, so we're all good there. Mr. McGuinty, thank you very much for being here tonight, and to Mr. Jorgensen as well. I really appreciate your time. Mr. McGuinty, what can you share with the committee about Canada's election integrity? You mentioned that at the outset of your remarks, but we'd like to hear more on that, if possible.
If we turn to the report on page or paragraph starting paragraph 12 in the 2020 annual report, Canadians, members can see a description of the critical election incident public protocol that was put into place, a big name, basically creating a panel of 5 persons chaired by the clerk of the Privy Council to be on guard for Canadians during the federal election process. When it was originally constituted, it was all about receiving information about cyber interference activities during a federal election. A report was then prepared by Jim Judd, the former head of CSIS, and that report, under the cabinet decree, was sent to NSICOP for review. And as a result of deliberations, the committee made a number of recommendations to the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada to improve that panel. And we illustrated as well, of course, as Monsieur Paulu just referred to. If you look at paragraph 70 of our report, we reference the fact that China likely launched cyber attacks on the Australian Parliament and 3 largest political parties before its last general election. And we cite, of course, Russian activities in the U.S. 2016 presidential election.
Thank you very much for that. I do want to ask you a general question about 3 specific things on espionage, on foreign interference, and on cyber attacks. To what extent is Canada active, working in concert with other countries, middle powers in particular, to counter any impact of those on our democracy? What can you share with us on that?
Look, I think it's fair to say in our 2019 foreign interference review, we indicated that we have a lot of work to do in improving cooperation between the federal, provincial, and municipal orders of government on this front. We also have a lot of work to do to enhance, as one of your speakers said earlier on your other panel, to enhance Canadians' understanding of the threats. But one of the things that we did do is we joined up with the G7, forgive me, to create a rapid response mechanism in 2018 and the summit in June 2018. We're now cooperating amongst the G8 to have a rapid response mechanism to follow and get informed about things that might be occurring in each of our respective jurisdictions. So there's a significant amount of cooperation going on, but we believe there's much more progress to make from a whole of government perspective in the Canadian context.
Thank you very much. And with the final question here, you did mention that a focus of the committee has been terrorism. I wanted to ask you specifically on the rise of the incel subculture and any thoughts that you can share on that. I know that in the public reports that have been issued by the committee that has come up, and I think it speaks to the fact that the nature of national security is changing. The nature of terrorism, in fact, is changing. If you could elaborate on that and any overlap that exists between incel subculture and white supremacist movements, if there's a connection between those two. Some have made that observation in the past.
Time being of the essence, Mr. Chair, I would recommend that members take a look at paragraphs 31 forward in our 2020 annual report. We clearly lay out the rise of this IMVE, ideologically motivated violent extremism movement. It is spreading and is spreading quickly. Canada has a very large per capita participation, up to 6,600 identified right-wing extremist channels, pages, groups, and accounts. Many, many, many different actors. At least 100 white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups existed in Canada, but now we believe that's up to about 300. So the growth has been exponential. It's a serious risk to Canada's national security, and we've laid it out in very clear form with all of the information that we could provide Canadians.
It looks like I have around 45 seconds left. So when you say, Mr. McGuinty, that on a per capita basis, Canada, the numbers are very high, can you elaborate on that in comparison to other democracies? Are we singled out in that sense?
Well, what we talk about, what we point to in the report is that one prominent message board alone, for example, on which Canadians are more active or much more active than American and British users. The point about this is that extremist dialogue is not necessarily criminal, but Canada is providing a large base from which to recruit or to become radicalized from within and from without the country. And that is one of the trends that's most worrisome. One of the biggest changes in our 2020 annual report compared to what we saw in 2018 in the same area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frederick. And maintenant, on continue avec Madame Normandin.
And now we're going on with Ms. Normandin for 10 minutes. Hello, Mr. McGuinty and Mr. Jorgensen. Unfortunately, I spent a short trip in your area, and I didn't want to leave, but my next question is about someone who, Mr. Bergeron, who I'm replacing today. He's very interested in this, and he has a question. Yes, the committee is nonpartisan and unanimous, but could we know more about Mr. Bergeron's file for becoming a candidate? Good evening, Ms. Normandin. Sorry for having lost you on the committee, but I'm also sorry because I can't provide you any information about the status of what's happening at the Prime Minister's office and at the Privy Council. We are missing a few committee members. We lost 2 members from the Liberal Party. A few changes were proposed with the Conservative Party. So I think all of this is being studied right now by the Prime Minister and his personnel. Thank you very much for the update. I'd also like to hear what you have to say. Well, you mentioned it in your preliminary remarks, what you have to say about the resilience of institutions and Canadians. One of the last committee hearings, Mr. Schnokilya came to testify, and he talked, amongst other things, about the role of CSIS that's trying to raise awareness with private companies. And the committee somewhat repressed this. They said that CSIS made an error, and he said that no, CSIS did the right thing in that situation. I'd like to hear what your comments would be about that. Is that something that will be changed going forward with respect to the committee's position on that? One of the challenges that we faced during our analysis in terms of foreign interference is the fact that in many sectors in Canada, people don't have the right to receive classified briefings because they don't have the secret or top secret clearance that is necessary to hear what's happening. And for example, we've seen this very same situation with our universities today. We saw measures were announced in Alberta recently, and many administrators and academics and presidents of universities are scratching their heads. They're wondering what's happening exactly. That was one of the challenges that our government has to address. It's part of what we identified in terms of our pan-governmental approach. I think now we have to open up a bit, and it's up to CSIS to define how we open up and to whom. But growingly, we've seen, even in terms of municipal police, they don't often understand what foreign interference means. So there's a lot of progress to be made in that area and to be communicated. Thank you very much. My next question is about the role of international allies. Ms. Brainy testified recently at the committee. We talked about the situation of Australia, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about the UK that has just did an integrated review of security, defense, development, and foreign policy report. We haven't seen this since the Cold War, and they seem to be very interested in the resilience of their infrastructure and their national structures in terms of the Five Eyes. Canada may seem a bit more laxist with respect to Huawei, and the UK seems to be perhaps a little bit more concerned with respect to the ownership of certain types of technology that is being used. Is that something that is worrisome or that the committee is looking at with respect to a study? The immediate question with respect to Huawei and the use of this technology is not one that was addressed by our committee. That's one thing. And secondly, what the UK has done and the study they did is something rather extraordinary and hasn't been done in Canada for decades. How all of this is linked and organized, or are we being effective? Is there real value for money, like we say? Well, there's much progress to be done. And that's a question that the committee did talk a bit about, but we haven't yet had the time to address it because right now we're really focused with other reviews in terms of cyber attacks and other departments and our CMP. But that is an excellent suggestion to look at some inspiration. Thank you. And quickly, speaking of technology, could they have a role to play with respect to those who are seeking to fight against the use of technology by China insidiously? Could that be another potential topic? Perhaps, but once again, it's not a topic that we discussed or that was presented to our committee. We're very disciplined in that respect. We really only look at what we really discussed in committee, but these are excellent suggestions. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Normandin.
Mr. Harris for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. McGuinty, for coming to us tonight, and appreciate your work on the on NCCOP. And I'd like to talk a little bit about foreign influence in Canada with respect to criminal activity, particularly things like money laundering as it affects the activities in Canada of criminalized gangs, some of them with this foreign influence connections. And the estimates that you quote in your report indicate that there's an upper estimate of $100 billion of investment in Canada through money laundering. I would call it investment using the term loosely, most prominently in real estate and casinos. And these are the most publicly discussed domestic examples, but it's also been looked into by CSIS and the RCMP and referenced, of course, in your 2018 and 2019 reports of a project called Project Sidewinder, referenced in a paper that was produced by Anne-Marie Brady, who's appeared before us. And she relies on the 1997 draft report between CSIS and RCMP with the code name Project Sidewinder, which was aimed to gather and analyze intelligence efforts by the Chinese government, intelligence about efforts by the Chinese government and Asian criminal gangs to influence Canadian business and politics. Now, that's a very serious subject, of course, but this leaked report from 1997 draft was, in fact, discredited by CERC itself in 1999 and 2000, and said it didn't really meet the standards of professional and analytic rigor. But they also noted that they revised the report, and a finalized version was issued in January 1999. But for some reason, NCCOP in 2018 or 2019 don't refer to the finalized Sidewinder report. So my question is that a report available to the NCCOP for its review, and was it aware of it, and did it ask for it?
Mr. Chair, could I ask my Director of Operations and Research to take a stab at that question? I don't want to get this wrong. That's a very pointed question about a single document, if I could.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I would say about that is we didn't ask for that specific report. So if we were to, I believe it would be available to us. There would be nothing preventing us from getting it, but we didn't ask for it. And with respect to Ms. Brady, I understand that she did reference it, but when we referenced Ms. Brady's reports, it was in a much broader context and on the basis of a much wider research and analytic review that she conducted.
So my concern, though, is that the idea of this money laundering and the criminal gang activity occurring in Canada with the extent that's been noted was identified as being related to foreign interference and the connection to foreign interference. And your report 2020 doesn't even talk about it in terms of foreign interference. It talks about having some commercial influence and perhaps inflating housing prices and putting out of reach of large segments of the population. The only mention of potential trouble is a footnote to paragraph 90, citing an article, says how Chinese gangs are laundering drug money through Vancouver real estate, but no mention in your 2020 report at all talks about this having some Chinese government influence, which is the subject of the Sidewinder report in its revised form. And I'm just wondering why it is that this would be missed by NSICOP and in its reporting in 2020 when it made reference to it in 2018 and 2019.
That's an omission I cannot address for you, Mr. Harris. I can certainly get back to you and find out. I think the report, though, does talk about the resurgence of groups, how many of those are considered to be national security threats, to what extent some of these groups are transnational. We talk about the fact the RCMP is conducting a number of priority investigations related to transnational serious organized crime. We talk about the limitations at FinTrack and its ability to track international monies that are coming into Canada for laundering. So I think we've tried to capture as best we can, but on that particular point, unless Mr. Jorgensen's got more information, I'll definitely get back to you.
Yeah, that I only have a short time left, so perhaps I should ask a question. Would NSICOP be interested in knowing the extent of whether or not there is governmental influence, Chinese government influence in this, and whether this is actually being studied and had been studied for decades by the various security agencies? There seems to be a bit of a lack of thorough review of that. Would that be of interest to NSICOP in the future?
I think it would be. I'm not so certain it's a lack of thorough. We did tackle 29,000 pages of documents, so we did the best we could. But certainly, we'll come back to you, and I'll check with my team.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. I will now go to the second round, which will have to be a little bit abbreviated as we finish at 9:30. We'll start with Ms. Stubbs for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Mr. McGuinty. Nice to see you again on this committee now. Certainly, as you've pointed out in your comments today and in the 2020 NSICOP report, which says, quote, the threat from espionage and foreign interference is significant and continues to grow, and that China and Russia remain the primary culprits. And these are the most significant long-term threats to Canada's sovereignty and prosperity. I guess I noted, though, that the 2018 NSICOP annual report also said, quote, China is known globally for its efforts to influence Chinese communities and the politics of other countries. The Chinese government has a number of official organizations that try to influence Chinese communities and politicians to adopt pro-China positions. It cites wealthy Chinese businessmen, Chinese students, mobilized diaspora populations, political donations, demonstrations, and influencing Chinese language media. And certainly Canadians are hearing more and more about the implicit and explicit and multi-layered threats to academia and the political sphere and research and technology and science and the scientific sectors. So I guess it's fair, I think, would you say, for us to draw a conclusion that it's evident that threats to Canadians from China's communist regime has continued to grow and to evolve. And so I wonder if, for all of us, you could just highlight, the highest priority measures that the government should implement to combat foreign interference from China and protect the safety and security of Canadians. Because even on an example like Operation Fox Hunt, you probably know I've asked multiple questions about this issue. The United States has made several arrests, yet still in Canada, neither officials nor Canadian elected representatives can say that any of that is happening. Just what are the highest priority things that the government should implement right now to protect Canadians?
It's an excellent question, Ms. Stubbs. Thank you for that. And we, in the report in 2019, we do lay out each of those really core areas: media influence, academic circles influence, political campaigns and politics influence. So we've tried to break it down by sector almost, as you've enumerated. But We've also kept the number of recommendations in our 2019 report review on foreign interference to a very small number. In fact, really 2. And the recommendation is about this comprehensive strategy to counter foreign interference and build institutional and public resiliency. And on page 109, or paragraph 297 of this 2019 report, we break it down. We talk about what's got to be dealt with sector by sector by sector, how it might be dealt with, including what are the short and long-term risks to Canadian institutions and the rights and freedoms posed by foreign interference. What are the range of institutional vulnerabilities targeted by hostile foreign states? And on it goes to give a bit of a work plan for that pan-Canadian approach that would be core to upping our game in this area. And the second major recommendation I want to come to with your forbearance, if with your patience, is a recommendation we've made now twice in a row to the government and to the Prime Minister. And that is that members of Parliament and senators should be briefed in detail on foreign interference activities that they may be subject to immediately upon swearing in and regularly thereafter. Because as one of your witnesses said in an earlier panel, many of us in the political elected public service life don't always understand what might be happening around us. So we've kept the recommendations down to 2, and the recommendation number 5, as it's called, is really a key breakdown sector by sector.
Thank you. And given that Australia has passed a pretty multi-pronged concrete policy approach to this issue, I'm wondering, I don't know if you can comment, but do you have any insight as to like what is the holdup for Canada? Why is this taking seems like an extraordinarily long time, given that this has been going on since the 90s? And also in your work, for the people who say, as we've heard and you've said, that they feel like they have no place to go, like they go to the police, for the CSIS, they go back and forth. Do you have any insight into what exactly the barriers are and what are the specific solutions?
On the first question of speaking for the government, I'm really not in a position to do that except to reference Minister Blair's 18-page document sent out to all MPs.
Mr. McGuinty, I'm
in December.
sorry, Ms.
Thank you,
Stubbs'
Mr.
time
Chair.
is up. I regret that. I'm sorry about that. But now I have to go on to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes, please.
Nice to see you here, Mr. McGuinty. This is your 3rd annual report, and this year's version isn't the first to highlight threats posed by foreign interference. Over the past year, Canadians have been seeing and hearing more from CSIS about this issue more than ever before. We've heard recently that while a former CSIS director in 2010 had sounded the alarm on foreign interference from the government of China, the public safety minister called the decision regrettable, and the PMO admonished the CSIS director for doing his job. Last year, CSIS contacted more than 225 entities across Canada and briefed at least 2,000 Canadian stakeholders. In your opinion, what do recent efforts by CSIS to raise awareness say about the level of seriousness granted to this issue?
I think the committee would say that it's encouraging that CSIS and its director is reaching out to engage more openly, giving keynote speeches, explaining the landscape, explaining the risks, the threats, the magnitude of some of these threats, and the magnitude of the opportunity in getting it better for Canadians, protecting their rights, for example. But in our 2019 report, we also are very open and we're very, very transparent and objective. The committee insisted in putting in where we're falling short in engaging with Canadians, where we're falling short in engaging with provinces, universities, institutions, to give them more information about what is happening. So that is rife at the back end of our foreign interference review chapter in the 2019 report, copy of which I hope you have. And I think we've been very transparent and objective in pointing that out.
Where have we been given more information for the universities?
My understanding, as we've documented in the report, is that CSIS regularly meets with university administrators to walk them through some of the risks. I would say that I think there's work to be done in this area. I think that, as I said earlier, with the decision by the province of Alberta to cease all scientific research relationship with China, if I understand the announcement, I think the administrators, the academics there are trying to figure out what is the best way forward to deal with this. And they certainly are going to need some assistance and help as they wrestle this to the ground.
So in your report, you also noted that there's many threats to our national security and that the landscape is changing, and you devote significant attention to right-wing extremism. You note that actors are active online with 6,600 channels, pages, groups, and accounts, and Canadians are sometimes more active than their US or UK counterparts. How serious is this threat, and what can better be done to address it?
I would say, Ms. Yip, that the committee concluded that between 2018 and 2020, this was the single greatest difference in the survey, the compendium of threats that we produce for Canadians. This is the only publicly produced, publicly available overview of the main national security threats produced by the Government of Canada, this new process we started. But the biggest change we've seen from 2018 to 20 is this growth in IMVEs and in this incel, this involuntary celibate movement. It is very worrisome. We've seen, for example, serious increases in neo-Nazi groups. They are active, they are growing. Of course, a number of them have been since listed by the Government of Canada as terrorist entities. In fact, 4 IMVE groups have been included by the government, which is a good start. But we've tried to lay this out so people understand. And of course, we've also, Mr. Chair, through you, we've also indicated to Canadians that the pandemic has had a profound influence on driving more of this activity underground. It's led to an uptake in this activity, probably because so many of us are home-based, or our ability to move about and take on more active lives has been constrained.
The listing of those organizations, is that part of the Terror Code listings process? Could you just talk a bit about that?
It is, and the government on February 3rd, I think it was, February 2021, listed 13 new groups as terrorist entities and reviewed 7 others. So I know that through that process, 4 groups, Atomwaffen Division, the Base, the Proud Boys, and the Russian Imperial Movement have been now classified as terrorist entities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Et maintenant, Madame Normandin, pendant...
And now, Ms. Normandin, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you very much. People sometimes joke about things in the opposition parties, saying that the government is better at creating tables to support reports rather than really implementing the recommendations. But in 2019, there was a report that said that, well, there was recommendations about foreign interference. And can you tell us what efforts the government made to implement these various recommendations? Thank you very much, Ms. Normandin. To begin, I think that Minister Blair partially responded to our report. Also, he responded to the opposition motion in the House of Commons to produce a 18 or 20-something page document that was circulated to all members of the House, showing what the government is doing or has done or will do. But it raises a real question about how the government responds to our recommendations. And the committee thinks there is much work to be done and much progress that is possible in this area. We've already completed 6 reviews and other annual reports. We produced 22 recommendations, etc. We spend a lot of time on these reports and recommendations. So we think that since they're unanimous, nonpartisan, and all parties participate in them, we think that the recommendations are more amenable to being implemented. So we're waiting for more efforts from the government to respond to what we're recommending. In that context, would it not be relevant to have a new way of proceeding when you start a study on a topic? Could you not also review the recommendations and how they were responded to? You actually read into the committee's approach. We discussed that in great detail, and we think we have to carry forward the recommendations that were done from one report to another. There should be a mandatory briefing for members and senators. Thank you very much, Ms. Normandin.
Mr. Harris, for the last 2.5 minutes. Mr. Harris, please.
Thank you very much. If I may follow up on what Ms. Normandin was speaking about just now, you just outlined that you've made 22 recommendations that were fully unanimous, fully nonpartisan to the government. Do you have any plans to review those recommendations and do a report on to what extent you see the government has followed them? Because if they're that unanimous and that clear, then they deserve respect. I think you're being very diplomatic, shall we say, when you say that there's more work to be done to fulfill the recommendations. That's a nice way of saying that they haven't been followed. So I wonder, can you tell us that your committee is likely to do a special report, perhaps, on saying where are we with the 3 sets of recommendations that we've made? Here's what we see happening, and here's what we see missing as a priority for government.
Mr. Harris, that's an excellent question, and it's something the committee is really seized with. I don't want to be diplomatic. I want to be forthright. It's a huge amount of work to come to ground in a nonpartisan way with these recommendations. We really deliberate long and hard. We're looking for recommendations that will improve the situation in the security and intelligence field and when it comes to protecting our rights and freedoms. So we believe, and I have spoken to the Prime Minister about this. I've spoken to his National Security and Intelligence Advisor about this. And we believe that regular and substantive responses to our recommendations would really strengthen accountability and increase transparency in the security and intelligence community. So in the UK, our equivalent organization, the ISC, receives regular government responses because they have an MOU with the government. That's something that might be considered here in Canada, but we are certainly now raising with the Prime Minister and the government how to better get feedback and information about those recommendations and what's happening with them, even though 1 or 2 of them have found their way directly into mandate letters for cabinet ministers.
Just have a brief moment, I see from the chair, but I do want to second your suggestion that a lot of work is done by your committee. I know from representatives from our party that's been part of that committee, there's a tremendous amount of work that takes place, and I want to commend you for it and thank you and all of your committee for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. That's a good way to conclude, I think. Thank you very much, Mr. McGuinty. Thank you, colleagues. Meeting adjourned.